Chapter 258. New York Central Square, War Heroes Memorial Hall. In front of the hall, two stone statues of young men in battle suits stood tall, one holding a sword and the other holding a shield. The two of them had their backs to each other, and their eyes were filled with majesty as they looked forward. At night, the light shone on the top of the statue's head, as if it was a circle of sacred crowns. A musical fountain was set at the feet of the statue. Under the music of the modern war, the rhythmic splashing of water set off an inspiring and impassioned momentum. Many office workers, or foreign tourists, brought their families, old and young, gathered around the statue in twos and threes, and stopped to look up. The two tall young men were slightly sneaky as they lowered the caps on their heads. They carefully avoided the crowd in front of the door and followed the endless stream of people into the memorial hall. "I'm here to watch propaganda to remember my own war memorial. Why would I do such a boring thing?" Sandwiched in the crowd, Cale felt bored for no reason. He glanced at the excited Steve next to him, sighed helplessly, and followed him into the hall. In the corridor of the memorial hall, the walls on both sides were embedded with screens that constantly played World War II propaganda films on a loop. A young man with a sword in a black battle suit and a young man with a shield in dark blue tights. The two of them were the protagonists, leading the soldiers and leading the charge to dominate the war. "This place doesn't suit me," Cale lowered the brim of his cap, afraid of being recognized. Watching his own propaganda film like this, he felt inexplicably ashamed. Steve, on the other hand, was watching with great interest. He was even more surprised by the modern color video, and his eyes constantly showed the splendor of accepting new things. In the corner of the exhibition hall, there was a lively crowd of tourists. The video showed a picture of a short young man, and accompanied by a voiceover, the explanation was, Steve Rogers. Before injection of serum, body weight 95 pounds, height 5 feet 4 inches, failed to enlist due to poor physical condition many times. After injection of serum, body weight 240 pounds, height 6 feet 2 inches. "Cale, they're talking about me over there." Steve smiled and whispered to Cale. Cale nodded, and the voice continued, "Steve Rogers was selected to participate in an unprecedented project during World War II. He became the world's first super soldier, and in his first action, he saved thousands of soldiers as prisoners. He was Captain America, who represented national justice. The legendary hero who disintegrated the Hydra organization and saved the world." Steve's eyes lit up. He patted Cale's shoulder and said proudly like a child, "What do you think? I'm awesome, right? Amazing." Cale didn't want to discourage his old friend, so he gave him a thumbs up. Steve smiled. His previous sadness disappeared, and he quietly clenched his fists. This at least made him understand that although this path was lonely and difficult, as long as the world recognized him as a hero, everything was worth it. The two of them continued to head deeper into the museum. They arrived at another large exhibition hall. Regardless of whether it was the photos or videos, they were all dark in tone. There was even a model pendant of a one-handed sword. The place was filled to the brim with tourists. Cale Adolph, when he first entered the recruit base, he quickly stood out in training and became a dazzling new star among the soldiers. He is the youngest major general in the United States, and also the greatest war hero of World War II. Not only did he disintegrate the Hydra organization, but he also dominated the battlefield in many large-scale wars, saving and accelerating the return of the world to peace. He is known as the contemporary symbol of peace. The explanation of the voiceover came into their ears. Steve forced a smile and looked dejectedly at Cale, who had his hands in his pockets and looked indifferent. "Why do I feel like my limelight has been stolen by you?" Steve said gloomily. "You think too much." Cale patted him on the shoulder to comfort him. In the war memorial, there were photos of important people from the Department of Science and Strategy, the Howling Commandos, and so on. Cale and Steve looked around, as if they were reminiscing about their lost youth. the war era that was gradually forgotten and buried by the world. The 21st century, the era of peace is so good. Steve sighed softly when he saw the end. You might not think so in the future. Cale shook his head and said coldly, this world is tidied up and clean. Many people will want to destroy and mess it up. Steve fell silent. He took one last look at Paige's photo on the wall, turned around, and waved his hand. Let's go. It's time to leave. Cale nodded, and the two of them retreated to the entrance of the museum. When they walked to the corridor near the entrance, a loud scream suddenly came from outside. Then, people seemed to be forced to return to the museum. What's going on? An uncle who wanted to go out was shocked and roared. Shut up. What responded to him was the rude curses of a few men outside the door. The uncle was about to say something when a loud gunshot rang out like a warning. He was so scared that his face turned pale and he retreated. Is this a robbery? Steve asked in surprise. He kind of understood what Cale meant. It should be. Cale felt powerless. New York was indeed the city of sin, however, he didn't know if there was something wrong with the head of the robbers to choose to rob the war memorial. Or could it be that the hero's halo would attract robbers to commit crimes? This was the default rule in hero movies. The two of them stopped in the middle of the corridor near the entrance. They didn't move at all, like two iron pillars. The frightened tourists rushed past them and hid in the hall of the museum behind them. Get in. 5 robbers in black with hoods over their heads held guns in both hands. They drove the tourists into the hall and blocked the entrance of the museum. The leader of the robbers stood in the corridor and glanced at the people inside. He said sternly, "Put your hands on your heads and squat down. Hand over your belongings one by one." As soon as he finished speaking, the tourists all squatted down in fear. In the blink of an eye, only 2 young men were left standing in the middle. Do you two want to die? The leader of the robbers raised his eyebrows and pointed his gun at them. However, the 2 of them didn't even look at him. They were discussing something in a low voice. Do you want me to do it, or do you want to do it? Cale asked with his hands still in his pockets. Let me do it. I've been lying down for so long. It's time to move my muscles and bones, Steve said with a shrug. Don't force me, the robber pointed his gun at Steve. Before he finished speaking, Steve suddenly moved. He took a quick step forward and dashed forward. The leader of the robbers reacted and put his finger on the trigger to shoot. However, Steve was obviously faster. He leaned under the leader's armpit and stretched out his hands quickly. He held the gun barrel with one hand and twisted the leader's wrist with the other. Bang! There was a gunshot and a light bulb on the ceiling of the hall broke. Steve flipped his hands, and the leader of the robbers' screams were still in his throat. His body was flipped more than 180 degrees, and his head hit the smooth floor hard. Not bad. Chapter 259. What's going on? Let's go in and take a look. The remaining 4 robbers at the door heard the gunshots and rushed into the hall with guns in hand. When they saw their boss lying unconscious on the ground, Steve was already rushing towards them like a cheetah. After being frozen for more than 60 years, Steve's physical fitness was not the same. His body cells were in their best state during hibernation, pushing his super soldier physique to its peak. Whether it was his senses, strength, physique, speed, or reaction arc, they were all 10 times that of a human. Under the burst of inhuman speed, a baseball cap fell off his head. Steve ignored it. After getting close, he used both his hands and feet to display his fierce and decisive combat skills. In just a few seconds, the remaining 4 robbers were completely defeated before they could even fire their guns. They wailed and knelt on the ground, the guns in their hands falling to the ground one after another. Only then did the baseball cap fall from the air to the ground. During wartime, you would have died on the battlefield. Please cherish the peaceful era now. Steve snorted in dissatisfaction and kicked the last robber in the air. The robber spat out blood and flew a few meters away from the door. His back rubbed against the floor in front of the door and he rolled until he reached the foot of the stone statue. Seriously. Steve patted the dust off his palms and turned around to pick up the baseball cap from the ground. When he looked up and saw Cale with a helpless expression and the shocked tourists in the hall, he realized that his identity seemed to have been exposed. Cale. Steve just opened his mouth and suddenly stopped. He slapped his head in self-reproach. Now, both of their identities had been exposed. Cale felt the burning gazes behind him and couldn't help but step forward. When he passed by Steve, he reminded him coldly, "Why aren't you moving?" Oh. Steve seemed to wake up from a dream and quickly followed him out of the hall. The two of them appeared quickly and left quickly, leaving behind a mess of injured and unconscious robbers lying on the ground. If I'm not wrong, that seems to be Captain America. It's exactly the same as the one in the video. If you're mistaken, I'm probably mistaken too. Wait, he even called that person Cale. Could it be? In the hall of the Memorial Hall, everyone looked at each other. After a short silence, they all rushed out of the door in a frenzy. The poor robbers on the ground were trampled once again. The two motorcycles continued on the road, merging into the main road of the city where traffic flowed, far away from the lively and noisy war memorial behind them. You reacted quickly. If the people were surrounded, it would be troublesome to escape. Steve smiled bitterly at Cale. Just get used to it. Cale shrugged and calmly said, in the 21st century, after people have eaten and drunk their fill, the bad people will develop dirty and evil thoughts, while the good people will indulge in the gossip on the internet. He added, tomorrow morning, your return and your appearance at the war memorial with me will probably spread throughout the United States. Fortunately, it's not a bad thing. Steve heaved a sigh of relief. It's hard to say. Cale shook his head. Who knew if the new media would add words like shocking, private meeting, or gay friends to the title? Oh right, speaking of gay friends, Cale stepped on the gas and the cylinder roared. The motorcycle immediately overtook Steve and said softly, "We've been to the places you wanted to go. Now, I'll take you to another place." Then, he drove the motorcycle at high speed and led Steve out of the city. New York, suburbs, Family Cal's old castle. It was late at night. The two motorcycles entered the secluded forest road, breaking the silence and darkness of the forest. They only stopped when they reached the courtyard of the old castle manor. The headlights shone brightly on the wooden steps of the manor's main building. Cale, where are we? Steve looked around in surprise. His expression suddenly changed as two red dots from sniper rifles fell on him. Furthermore, there was also a shadow that rushed out from the darkness and approached them at an extremely fast speed. Steve was highly nervous when Cale clapped his hands and said coldly, "All right, I'm a guest." As soon as he finished speaking, the red dots disappeared. At the same time, a middle-aged man wearing a butler's uniform rushed forward and knelt on one knee. He said respectfully to Cale, "Butler of the family's old site, K2 Eden, greets the family head." Cale nodded and got off the motorcycle. He looked up at the lit manor and said softly, "This place really hasn't changed." "That's true." The butler stood up and said emotionally, "Ever since you left Earth and this place became the family's old site, Mrs. Lucy didn't let us change it. Even the trees around and the chairs in the house are exactly the same as they were 60 years ago. You've worked hard here. When you return to the family base, you can receive 10 years of infinite equation medicine for free," Cale said calmly. "Thank you, family head." The butler was overjoyed. 10 years was 3 or 4 bottles of infinite equation medicine. If one wasn't a black rank K2, who knew how many family contribution points one would need to exchange for it? "Take us to the old warehouse," Cale continued. "Yes. Please come this way." The butler led Cale and Steve to the back of the manor's main building, which was the old warehouse building. The door of the old warehouse building was locked with iron chains and old locks. The door was covered in cobwebs and dust. As per your orders. The warehouse hasn't been opened or used in all these years. The butler said. Very good. Cale nodded. Steve asked in confusion, Cale. What do you want to do by bringing me to this warehouse? Do you still remember Baki Barnes? Cale asked him back. Steve shuddered and said with a pained expression, how could I forget him? He fell into the snow valley in order to save me. He seemed to react and said anxiously, why did you suddenly mention him? Could it be, that's right. Baki is still alive. Cale nodded and kicked the warehouse door. He only used half of his strength. Because the door was too old and rotten, the door panel and chain fell off and flew into the warehouse room, raising clouds of dust. You said Baki is still alive? Steve was stunned. His eyes were filled with excitement and surprise. Yes. Not long after the war ended, I met him in the Soviet Red Room. Cale pulled the switch in the room and walked into the warehouse while talking about how he had frozen Baki. At that time, he had no choice. Baki's memory was messed up due to the brainwashing and he couldn't control his own body. In order to avoid being controlled by others, he became a killing machine. Cale asked Howard to build a freezer and freeze Baki in the basement of the old warehouse. One day, he would be unfrozen and awakened. Only Cale and Howard knew about this. Even the members of Family Cal didn't know that there was a living frozen person in the basement of the warehouse. And today, it was time to wake him up. Cale stopped in front of the basement door. The door in front of him was sealed and locked. Even a small bomb couldn't blow it open. It could only be opened from the inside of the basement. It's much more convenient with the hanging ring. Cale shook his head and stretched out his right hand that was clenched into a fist. Venom covered his entire arm and transformed it into a black hammer. He aimed at the door and smashed it with the hammer. Violent demolition. Chapter 260. The power of the heavy hammer was equivalent to dozens of tons of impact energy. In close range, its power was no less than a modern mini-missile. Bang! It was as if thunder had struck the ground. The entire old manor shook. The old warehouse trembled and was on the verge of collapse. The security door in the basement caved in and cracked. After finishing all this, Cale calmly retracted his right hand. The dark coat on his arm was also removed in the blink of an eye and melted into the sleeve of his leather jacket. The butler was stunned. He looked at Cale with even more fanaticism. It was as if he was a believer looking up at the God he had believed in all his life. Steve's focus was not on that. After the door of the basement was violently broken open, he rushed into the room with the dust gushing out of the door. Cale turned on the light switch and followed him into the basement. But soon, their expressions changed slightly. In the basement that had been sealed for more than half a century. Under the dim yellow light of the old electric lamp, there was indeed a rectangular frozen warehouse in the middle of the room. However, all the wires connected to the frozen warehouse had been disconnected, and the door of the frozen warehouse was open facing the door. There was not a single person inside. Cale, what's going on? Steve's pupils contracted. He turned around and looked at Cale in shock. Cale's face turned cold. He glanced around the room. There were obvious signs of outsiders coming in. He calmly called out, "Butler." "Pa!" The butler fell to his knees. His face was pale and bloodless. He crawled on the ground and said with a trembling voice, "Master. I can guarantee with my life that ever since you left the old manor, there has only been one incident. No one other than the family has come here." "Incident? Tell me, what incident?" Cale said softly. "It was about 10 years ago. The forest next to the manor suddenly caught fire. In order to prevent the fire from spreading to the manor, the family members who stayed here went to put out the fire. There was half a day when the manor was unguarded. The butler recalled carefully and said quickly, after the fire was controlled, we checked the main building. There were no signs of theft. As for the old warehouse, we don't have access to it, so we didn't go in to check it out. Cale's brows furrowed tightly. After a moment of silence, he said to Steve, it should be that time when someone came in and forcibly took away Baki, who was still frozen and sleeping. Those bastards, what are they going to do to Baki? Steve's handsome face was full of anger. He clenched his fists so hard that his bones cracked. So much time has passed. It's not that easy to find out. Cale's face was expressionless. A cold light flashed through his eyes as he said calmly, don't worry about this matter. Someone is causing trouble in my territory. I will give you a satisfactory answer. The steward's heart trembled, and his head sank even lower. He knew that the master was really angry this time. If the patriarch was angry, the consequences would be dire. Cale, I'll thank you in advance. However, Baki's matter is my matter. I will do my best. Even if it means risking my life, I will find him and bring him back. As Steve spoke, he walked resolutely towards the basement door. It was as if he finally had a primary goal in life after waking up from the ice. Cale didn't stop him and let him leave first. I wanted to take advantage of this rare period of peace to let you have a good rest. Once you move now, you won't be able to stay idle in the future. Cale sighed inwardly. His gaze fell on the broken and abandoned frozen warehouse again. He called again softly, Butler. Here. The butler raised his head and answered. Cale said coldly, inform all the carts to use all the channels and resources on hand to find the whereabouts of Baki Baines. Yes, we will complete the mission. The butler nodded and quickly retreated to the basement. Until he left the old warehouse. Only then did the butler let out a sigh of relief. He wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead. His previously gentle and humble face was now filled with murderous intent. Who the hell did this? They almost killed me. On Earth, the carts were very powerful. The forces they controlled were spread all over the world. They ignored the nobles and the law. They were the kings of the underground world for decades. And all of this was given by the patriarch, Cale. They were truly under the patriarch. The butler smiled coldly, the patriarch has just returned. Many of the carts are waiting for the opportunity to show off. This time, when the news is released, I guess many murderous perverts will make their move. The carts usually accepted the Zero Organization's missions that were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They were all used to kill time. No one knew how far they would go when they were serious. That day, Cale spent the night in the manor. He only returned to New York City the next morning. Dehao Tower. Since the establishment of the unnatural firm was made public, people from all over the world came every day. They wanted to do business or inquire about supernatural matters. There were also a lot of jokes among them. For example, some people said that they were troubled by their superpowers. In the end, they were all liars or mentally ill. Not long after, they were kicked out of the door by the carts. There were also many spies or media personnel from all over the world. They wanted to take the opportunity to find out some unknown secrets. In the end, they were kicked out of the door like chairs. After all, the carts were old foxes in the underground world. They were the top professional spies, arms dealers, and assassins. It was not easy to trick them. But even though they kicked out batch after batch, and the blacklist grew day by day, people still came to the firm every day. It was as if the firm had become a hot topic in New York. Cale did not care about this. The reason he started the unnatural firm was to establish a family branch on the surface to let people know and acknowledge the existence of the carts. At the same time, it was also to use people all over the world as spies to collect some useful information. Of course, if it could attract the existence of mutated humans like Logan, it would be an extra benefit. Kale avoided the consultation crowd. He took the staff passage and went straight to the top floor from the private elevator. While he was still in the elevator, Vice's radio wave connected to the building's internal network. Not long after, the speaker in the elevator said, "Master. Your secretary, Yu Tong, is now in the office on the top floor." Kale nodded to show that he understood. Vice continued, "She looks a bit depressed. Seems like she has something on her mind." Kale glanced at the electronic watch on his wrist and said in surprise, "You can even tell her expression and what's on her mind now." "I learned this from Jarvis." Vice silently pushed the responsibility to Jarvis. Kale scolded, "Jarvis is not as boring as you. He assisted Tawny and modified the Iron Man armor day and night. When you have time, you should learn from Tawny. Currently, your Iron Man armor is the weakest in my combat mode." Vice was speechless. But it was true. Now, in terms of comprehensive, Venom's full coverage had many forms. In terms of power, Vulcan's divine power was unstoppable. If the technology branch of Steel was not modified, it would really be outdated. Chapter 261. Kale did not take Vice's words to heart. Yu Tong, due to her ability to control her mind, was a loner and independent person. She had killed Nissan soldiers for him since she was a few years old. Why would she be depressed? Was there something on her mind? Kale smiled faintly and walked out of the elevator. However, when he entered the living room, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Yu Tong sat quietly on the edge of the balcony wall. The hem of her long dress flowed down her straight and fair legs to the floor. She tilted her beautiful face slightly and looked out with her beautiful eyes. The breeze blew her long black hair, and the sun shone on her body naturally. She was like a flower that stood alone in the world. Kale was stunned because he felt melancholy and loneliness from Yu Tong in front of him other than coldness and elegance. Vice was right. Yu Tong had something on her mind. In other words, Kale had never truly understood Yu Tong. More than 60 years ago, he used her as a tool and made her the most ruthless guardian of the family Cal for more than half a century. Now, he treated her as his secretary and follower. He made her do things according to his orders, such as killing people and saving people. She seemed to have a high status and power, but she was as lowly as a maid. Kale did not even think about what Yu Tong was thinking and what she wanted. "Yu Tong!" Kale shouted. Yu Tong heard his voice and immediately turned around. She smiled faintly. Her originally indifferent and melancholy face bloomed into a stunning smile again. She landed on the wall and said softly, "Boss. I already know about what happened last night. I will now." "Enough." Kale interrupted her and asked inexplicably, "Let the other carts do those things. Tell me, what were you thinking about just now?" Yu Tong was stunned. A trace of panic flashed through her eyes. She lowered her head and remained silent. Kale said bluntly, "What do you want to do? What are your concerns? What are your thoughts? You can tell me. As long as I can do it, I will try my best to satisfy you." He had always been like this. Women's thoughts were too difficult to guess, so he decided not to guess and asked directly. With Kale's current strength and status, he could basically accomplish the dreams that people often talked about. He could basically ignore the concerns that people often talked about. However, Yu Tong, who had always been obedient, remained silent for a long time. Kale thought for a moment, then sighed and said, "If you want to regain your freedom and leave family Cal, I can also agree to that." Yu Tong had sacrificed enough for family Cal. If she really wanted to regain her freedom, she could also make concessions. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Yu Tong's delicate body trembled. She raised her head in fear. Under the unprecedented fear, her pretty face turned pale. "Boss, are you chasing me away?" Crash, the floor-to-ceiling window shattered into pieces. The table and decorations on the wall fell down. Yutong's emotions were fluctuating violently. Her strong will was almost out of control. She wantonly attacked everything in the hall. I just said, before Kale could finish his sentence, a black shadow flashed past. A fragrant wind assaulted his nose. Yutong jumped into his arms and grabbed his back tightly. "Boss, please don't chase me away." Yutong was really scared. Her whole body was trembling as she said that. At this moment, Kyle seemed to have seen the little girl who had just come out of the glass nutrition tank in a trance. "From now on, you will be a sharp blade in my hand." Yes. That one word of promise was a promise that had existed since ancient times. Kale realized that he had said something wrong. He hurriedly comforted Yutong in his arms and said helplessly, "I didn't say that I wanted to chase you away. I also want you to stay by my side. I just want to know what you want to do." "Really?" Yutong's eyes widened. She turned to look at him. Her silver eyes were still filled with tears. "Of course." Kale nodded. Yutong heaved a sigh of relief. She thought for a moment and hesitated. In the end, she said uneasily, "I want to take you to see someone." "See someone?" Kale was stunned. He knew that Yutong didn't have any relatives. Therefore, he quickly guessed the correct answer. "A friend?" Yutong quickly nodded. This time, Kale was really shocked. Yutong had the ability to read minds. Apart from him, she didn't like to interact with others. He didn't expect that she would make a friend. It couldn't be a guy, right? "Let's go. Take me to see him," Kale said with a straight face. He had to admit that he cared a little. He had brought Yutong back and raised her. She was like his own daughter. How could he let someone else take her away for no reason? Since Yutong had already said it, she didn't hesitate anymore. She immediately nodded obediently in agreement. Queens, New York, Black Rose Bar. Kale accompanied Yutong to the entrance of the bar. His brows furrowed slightly. Due to his acquaintance with the playboy Howard, his first impression of bars was a little bad. They even chose a bar for a meeting. Looks like Yutong's friend isn't a good person. Kale thought to himself with a straight face. He had the urge to set the bar on fire. "Boss, it's in here." Yutong leaned over naturally. She wrapped her hands around Kale's arm and led him to the entrance of the hotel. Kale held back the surging divine power in his body. Following Vice and Venom, who were hiding in his body, the two of them secretly broke out in cold sweat for Yutong's friend. The bar was very big. Colorful lights flashed and trendy electronic music was playing. A group of young men and women were drinking and dancing to their heart's content inside. However, after Kale and Yutong walked in, the hall seemed to have quieted down. Everyone sensibly made way for them. There was only a punk girl in leather at the bar counter. Her back was to the door as she sat lazily on a high chair and drank. She had eye-catching long dark green hair that draped over her shoulders. Her body was very slender and beautiful. She even asked the bartender to add more wine to her glass. "Lorna," Yutong led Kale to the front and called softly. "A girl?" Kale's heart relaxed inexplicably. At this moment, the girl just happened to slowly turn around. His eyes lit up. Clearly, the girl in front of him was definitely a Western beauty who didn't lose to Natasha. It was just that her style was a little strange. The girl's exquisite facial features were covered in smoky makeup. Her lips were painted with dark red lipstick. Her dark green hair was slightly curled and draped over her shoulders. She looked a little lazy and rebellious. If Yutong represented Eastern beauty, then this was an out-and-out Western beauty. Especially when the two of them stood together. East and West regions, age, and personality, appearance, and style were very different. They didn't seem out of place at all. Instead, it was breathtaking. "You're here." The girl called Lorna was overjoyed. She was about to ask Yutong to sit down, but when she saw Yutong holding Kale with both hands, her beautiful face instantly turned as cold as the North Pole with a hint of disgust. Although she recognized Kale's identity at first glance, Lorna still said coldly and arrogantly, "Who are you?" Chapter 262. As soon as Lorna's cold and domineering words came out, the expressions of the young men and women in the bar changed drastically. In the entire New York City, there was probably no one who didn't know the silver-haired young man who had accompanied Yutong here. The bartender trembled and almost dropped the bottle in his hand. He leaned close to Lorna's ear and whispered in a panic, "I say, big sister, be more polite with your words. They're at least peaceful, I'm talking to him. Is it your turn to speak?" Lorna glared at him coldly. The bartender had no choice but to retreat. He tactfully distanced himself from them so that he wouldn't be able to escape if a fight broke out later. "Don't worry, I won't hold it against a little girl." Kale smiled faintly. Even though the green-haired beauty in front of him looked to be in her early 20s, in his eyes, she was still a little girl who hadn't fully developed. However, his casual words seemed to have angered Lorna. She pressed her left hand in the air, and a dazzling green light shone from her palm. A metahuman? Or a mutant? Seeing this scene, Kale was surprised. Soon, he felt the green light modify the force field. The air around him suddenly froze, and the gravity in the area where he was standing suddenly increased by 3 to 4 times. "Lorna!" Yutong exclaimed. She was about to say something, but Kale raised his hand to stop her. He waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. In the gravity field, Kale raised his eyebrows and said indifferently and disdainfully, "That's it?" The coldness on Lorna's beautiful face intensified. She pressed down with both hands instead of one hand, and the green light rippled in the air. The gravity field, which was only targeting Kale, instantly jumped from 4 times to more than 10 times. If it were an ordinary person, they would probably kneel on the ground in this situation and experience many side effects such as nausea and dizziness. However, Kale's expression was the same as before. He didn't feel any discomfort at all. He calmly watched Lorna, who was using her ability, and actually took half a step forward. It would be a joke if he wasn't. After all, decades ago, he often warmed up in the family base's gravity room that was more than 10 times stronger. Kale felt very relaxed under 10 times the gravity on Earth. It was not much different from usual. This greatly touched Lorna's pride, prompting her to continue using her ability. Her hands began to tremble slightly, and the green light from her ability shone even brighter. 10 times, 13 times, 15 times, 18 times. When the gravity was 20 times stronger, even the lights in the room were slightly distorted by the force field. Kale casually walked up to Lorna, picked up the bottle, and poured some wine into the glass. He even raised the glass and took a sip. "It's not bad, but it's a bit too strong," he commented. It was unknown if he was tasting the wine or if he was using this to describe the other party. "You." Lorna's face was slightly pale. She pressed her hands down as low as possible, and the green light moved rhythmically like smoke. She was already using all the abilities she wasn't good at in her force field domain. However, no matter how high the gravitational field was, the man in front of him did not show any signs of abnormality. This was a humanoid monster. In a daze, the green light in Lorna's hands suddenly spun, triggering the activation of other abilities. Clang, 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 in an instant, everything in the bar, especially the metal items, trembled under the guidance of some mysterious force and was about to attack Kale, who was the target of hostility. "Stop!" Yutong's angry voice sounded. At the critical moment, an invisible and powerful force swept out like a wave, suppressing the trembling items and making them unable to move. Bang! The two superpowers collided in the room. The glasses and bottles nearby could not withstand the pressure and immediately cracked and shattered. The scene was rather bizarre and spectacular. Lorna looked up in shock and saw the silver light in Yutong's eyes. She knew that she had screwed up and immediately cancelled the ability she had used. She apologized very sincerely. "I was wrong." Lorna only wanted to teach Kale a lesson, but she didn't expect to accidentally use an ability that she hadn't mastered yet, which made her best friend Yutong angry for the first time. Kale's eyes flashed with approval. If she didn't like it, she would show it on her face. Her style was more domineering and direct. If she knew that she was wrong, she would just admit it and apologize. This girl's personality was to his liking. Of course, the key was still her ability. Kale's gaze fell on Lorna. Dozens of ability cards rushed out from her body, 2 of which were dazzling. The first one was the ability she had used at the beginning, Force Field ability. Force Field Traction, create a force field to draw. Blue ability card. Create a force field with the ability to reverse, weaken, or increase the force field in the area. Ability users can only create a force field within 50 meters, and the strength of the force field is directly related to the size of the area the force field draws and the distance. The limit of the force field is 20 times Earth's gravity. Current status, can be drawn. In Kale's opinion, this ability was very powerful, but because it was a weakened version of the control force field, there were too many restrictions, which was why the card's grade was so low. However, Kale's gaze didn't stop. Instead, it landed on the second ability card. In just a few seconds, he almost couldn't maintain his calm and exclaimed. He had never expected that he would encounter this ability card in the current world. This was one of the ability cards he had dreamed of. Magnetic Field Control, perfect control of the magnetic field. Rare purple ability card. Able to control any form of magnetic field. The maximum ability one can control at a time is unknown. Currently, it is known to be able to control metal objects above 1,000 tons. The ability to control the magnetic field can be expanded to the atomic level, changing the chemical structure and modifying substances. Able to control a large number of individuals at the same time and form them into complex machines, even achieving invisibility by bending the visible light around them. To a certain extent, one can use magnetic force to strengthen one's body, increasing one's strength and endurance, even surpassing the limits of a human, reducing one's reaction time to 1/15 of a normal human's. Current status, unable to draw. Restrictions. 1. Ability user, due to mental state, has yet to fully master this ability. 2. Card owner already has a rare purple prefix ability card. Kale's mouth twitched slightly, his heart bleeding as he felt pain. This was magnetic field control. It was even more perfect than magnetic field control. When this ability was developed to the extreme, even killing a god would be a piece of cake. If it weren't for the 2 restrictions, he would have given up on the God Race genetic ability card and drawn the magnetic field control ability card. This ability could no longer be described with the word strong. It was terrifying. Lorna turned her face away and covered her chest, her beautiful eyes glaring coldly at Kale. "Why are you staring at me?" Kale shifted his burning gaze away. He really didn't look at her chest. Who asked that ability card to be too attractive? Indeed, Yutong wouldn't feel at ease staying beside such a man. Lorna sighed in her heart and racked her brains, trying to find a strategy to let her best friend escape from Kale's clutches. Chapter 263. Inside the bar, due to the superpower battle just now, a large group of handsome men and beautiful women had already silently left the venue. A fight between gods was not to be messed with. At a square table, Kale and Yutong sat next to each other on one side. Lorna sat alone across from them, her hand resting on the back of the chair domineeringly. The 3 of them were silent. The strange aura they formed caused the atmosphere around them to be a bit awkward. This is the wine you wanted. The bartender trembled as he carried a tray with a few bottles of wine and intact glasses. After swiftly putting down the wine and glasses, he quickly retreated, afraid that he would be dragged into this inexplicable dispute. Lorna's beautiful face seemed to be frozen with frost. She crossed her arms and glared at Cale with a straight face. If looks could kill, Cale would have been blasted into pieces. Cale was very relaxed. He poured himself a glass of wine naturally while diverting some of his attention to draw cards. Yes, even though magnetic control could not be drawn, force field traction was also a blue ability card that could only be found by chance. This ability had little effect on the current Protoss genes. It was a card draw choice that could coexist well with each other. However, just because Cale didn't care didn't mean that his master protector, Yutong, didn't care. Yutong's beautiful eyes flickered with silver light as she said coldly, "Lorna, if you treat my boss like this again, I won't hold back anymore." Friends were friends, but if she could only choose one between her friends and her boss, then her answer would have been decided 60 years ago. "You won't even let me glare at you," Lorna sighed inwardly but didn't dare say anything. She couldn't get angry at Yutong. Now, she finally understood how important Cale was to Yutong. Yutong, who had never gotten angry at her in the past, had actually argued with her multiple times because of him. Thinking of this, Lorna became even more indignant. She picked up a bottle of wine, raised her head domineeringly, and gulped down a few mouthfuls. She was also a ruthless person. Cale shook his head. As he read the card, he was thinking about something else. Another mutant. After Yutong, Logan, and saber-toothed tiger, this was the fourth mutant he had encountered. And this magnetic field control ability, as well as his straightforward and overbearing temperament, no matter how you look at it, he seems to have inherited a certain great villain in the X-Men universe. Does that guy really exist? That was not right. Cale dispelled this thought and reorganized his thoughts. Just like the future Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, their existence and appearance may not necessarily be the descendants of that guy. There is also the possibility of a genetic android. Lorna's background was most likely similar to Yutong's, which was why they became close friends. Thinking that, Cale looked at Lorna with a gentler gaze. "Awesome." Lorna put down the bottle and wiped her lips with her other hand. She didn't have the grace of a goddess at all. The wine flowed down her fair and smooth chin and slid down her neck, sinking into her snow-white cleavage. "Then let's get down to business." Lorna glanced sideways at Cale, then at Yutong. Her eyes darted around as she pondered and said, "Mr. Peace, I know you're a legendary hero who ended World War II and just returned from an alien planet, but that's not the main point. There's no reason for a woman to wait for you for so long. It's been more than half a century." Lorna cleared her throat and said in a shocking tone, "Let me ask you one thing. Are you going to marry Yutong?" Pfft. Cale had just taken a sip of wine when he spat it all out. The water mist splashed all over Lorna's face. Lorna didn't say anything. She picked up a towel, wiped her face, and put it down. Everything showed that she was serious about what she had asked. Cale's mind was still in a mess, and he didn't know what to say. Lorna was delighted and said in a low voice, as expected, "You haven't even thought about it, have you? You have to know that Yutong isn't young anymore. You don't want to marry her, but you still want her to stay by your side. Isn't that contradictory?" Cale thought for a moment. Indeed, that was the truth. Yutong really wasn't young anymore. If there was a suitable candidate, why don't? Cale stopped. He suddenly realized that he couldn't bear to part with Yutong. It wasn't the feelings between a man and a woman, but a deeper layer of restraint. It could even be said to be selfish possessiveness. He said perfunctorily, "If Yutong wants to leave, or if she has someone she likes, I'll let her leave." Lorna was secretly delighted. Everything was going according to her plan. "I won't leave, boss." Yutong suddenly opened her mouth and said firmly. She added, Besides, I don't have anyone I like other than Boss. Who says you don't? Lorna retorted. She pointed at her nose and said loudly, don't I? Pfft. Cale had just taken a sip of wine when he heard such shocking words. He couldn't help but spit it all over Lorna's face again. Girl, your way of thinking is very dangerous. It's very clear that neither you nor I have that, Yutong explained very naturally. We can't be life partners. We can only be friends. She had been born with cognitive abilities and could read other people's thoughts. She knew a lot of things, but she just ignored them. Yutong continued, also, my life and abilities were given to me by Boss. Everything I have belongs to him. If you want me to leave one day, you can kill me and leave with my body. Lorna fell silent. She knew that what Yutong said was probably true. The cabbage had been eaten by the T-Rex. Lorna sighed slightly. She knew she couldn't persuade her. She picked up the wine bottle gloomily and gulped down half of it. This meeting had basically come to an end. Exactly half an hour passed. The sound of a successful card drawing sounded in Cale's mind. A blue ability card entered the card space and leaned against the same level, self-healing factor. Just as they were about to leave, Yutong suggested, oh, right. Boss, can you shake Lorna's hand? Huh? Cale raised his eyebrows slightly. Thinking that this might be the purpose of Yutong's visit, he simply stood up and took the initiative to reach out his right hand. Lorna pouted. Under Yutong's expectant gaze, she stood up lazily from the chair and also reached out with her right hand. This was just for Yutong. It was a sign of acknowledgement of the other party's friendly gesture. But when their palms came into contact with each other, what's going on? Lorna was stunned. She felt her ability to control the magnetic field involuntarily activate on its own, attaching itself to her right hand and Cale's body. She wasn't the only one. Even Cale found it novel. The fire god's power hidden in his body also seemed to respond to the other party's enthusiasm, like a warm current flowing into his hand and Lorna's body. When the two abilities touched, it was as if some kind of chemical reaction had occurred, and there was an obvious qualitative change. In a short moment, a dazzling and beautiful five-colored aurora surrounded their hands, illuminating the bar's hall with strange and dazzling colors. Chapter 264. Aurora was a phenomenon that emitted light. It usually occurred at the north and south poles of Earth. Due to the solar wind's charged particles entering the Earth's magnetic field, it would display a brilliant and beautiful light in the starry sky at night. Cale never would have thought that his fire god's godly power, which contained the mysteries of the Protoss, and Lorna's magnetic field control ability, would create a natural aurora phenomenon when the two came into contact with each other at zero distance. It had to be said that this was a mysterious coincidence. The fire god's godly power aside, it required a member of the Protoss, and the godly power was innately fire type. For example, war god Thor couldn't do it. Magnetic field control ability, a superior ability to control magnetic fields, required a special mutation of the X gene. Even among mutants, it was 1 in 10,000. The probability of having these two abilities and coming into contact with each other was basically zero in the entire universe. But at this moment, in Earth's Queens, New York, in a mediocre bar called Black Rose. With Cale and Lorna's hands as the center, the two abilities circulated on their own and blended together joyfully. The brilliant aurora light shone in the room. Ah! Lorna stared blankly. She suddenly snapped out of her daze and pulled back her right hand as if she had been electrocuted. The aurora scene dimmed and disappeared in an instant. The bar's lobby returned to normal. Cale glanced at Lorna one last time and waved his hand, indicating for Yutong to follow him. Then, he left the bar. Lorna, goodbye. Next time, I'll come alone, Yutong said and followed Cale. Lorna only came back to her senses after the two left the bar and nodded. She looked at her right palm in confusion. There was still some warmth from the fire god's power. What's going on? I've never felt this before, Lorna muttered to herself. She covered her chest with her palm. Her heart raced uncontrollably, as if the interaction of abilities had a lasting side effect. That guy, what did he do to me? Her body was heating up. She had the illusion that she wanted to see the aurora again. After coming out of Black Rose Bar. Kale thought for a moment and said with a faint smile, "Your friend is not bad. You can get to know her better. You can even try to pull her into the unnatural firm." "I know." Yu Tong nodded. She lowered her head and revealed a beautiful smile. She had brought Boss here because she wanted him to acknowledge her existence. Otherwise, he would never be able to treat Lorna so kindly and sincerely. With the current situation, this trip could be considered complete. Yu Tong looked at Kyle's tall and broad back and thought for no reason, but as long as I can stay like this and follow behind the boss, even if it's thousands of years, it doesn't seem to be a big deal. She quickened her pace and got closer to Kyle, but maintained the last meter of distance between them. After this trip, Kyle returned to the Dihao Tower and completely integrated into the 21st century life on Earth. He mainly studied the actual combat of the fire god's power and the use of the divine artifact Eternal Fire, checked Tawny's improvement work on the Iron Man armor, and paid attention to the unnatural phenomena around the world. At the same time, Bruce Banner had moved to New York alone and was tracked by SHELD elite agents every day. Also, in the past week or two, the whole world was surging with undercurrents. First, in order to use the power of the country to find the whereabouts of his friend Dong Bing Baki, the legendary hero Captain America, Steve Rogers, officially announced his comeback and joined the mysterious United Nations Department SHELD. He, Black Widow, and Hawkeye ran around the world on SHELD's secret mission to track down the remnants of Hydra. Second, Family Cal and Zero secretly moved out to find Dong Bing's whereabouts. They accidentally caused turmoil in the underground world. Countless ancient nobles and private organizations didn't know what was going on. They could only strictly prohibit their members from going out without permission. They hid at home and shivered. In addition, there were also things that no one knew about happening in secret. Africa, a remote central area. On the boundless savanna, a large herd of cattle and sheep were leisurely drinking water by a slightly dried-up pond. In the wild grass that was nearly half a person's height on the side, predators like lions and leopards were waiting for an opportunity to move. A ferocious lion crept closer. Just as it was about to charge and hunt, its ears suddenly flapped. It looked up at the sky vigilantly. The pupils of the beast suddenly contracted and reflected the fierce fire. In the blue sky, an interstellar spaceship was approaching at high speed. As it broke through and passed through the atmosphere at high speed, the outer shell of the spaceship spontaneously ignited due to friction. It looked like a fireball falling to the ground. The distance between the spaceship and the grassland below quickly shortened. 10,000 meters, 5,000 meters, 1,000 meters, countless cattle, sheep, and predators panicked and ran away as fast as they could. Boom! The interstellar spaceship crashed into the pool. Under the terrifying impact, mud splashed out dozens of meters. More than half of the spaceship was embedded in the ground. It turned off and sizzled. The small cabin door facing the sky suddenly opened. In the billowing smoke, a tall and burly alien man climbed out of the cabin door and stood on the crashed spaceship. He looked around at the surrounding tropical grassland in a daze. "This is Earth," the alien man muttered to himself. His eyes were as dark as ink, revealing a different kind of emotion. His fists were slightly clenched tightly. Since leaving the spacetime wormhole in planet Sokka, 26 years had passed since he wandered in the human world in the universe. Along the way, he changed countless biological hosts, passed through the Milky Way, and finally stumbled to this place. Earth, the place in his mind that had always appeared in his memories. I hope that I can find the thing that I have been searching for in my memory here. The alien man took a deep breath and jumped off the interstellar spaceship. He squatted by the side and looked at the remaining half of the pool. It was a ball of bubbling mud. He reached out his hand like lightning and grabbed and pulled. A black fish was already in his hand, constantly struggling with its tail. The alien man licked his lips. His stomach rumbled. He didn't care that the fish was still covered in mud and directly stuffed it into his mouth, wolfing it down. In the grass not far behind him, the lion quietly approached, vigilantly staring at the prey in front of it. It moved fiercely like an arrow released from a bow. The strong wind caused by it caused the grass to flutter and lower. It quickly and vigorously pounced toward the back of the man's neck. The alien man didn't move at all. He was still tasting the raw fish from Earth, unaware of the impending danger. The lion opened its bloody mouth and jumped up. When it was half a meter away from the back of the man's neck, a black spike suddenly protruded from the man's neck. "Awoah!" The lion let out a pitiful cry. The sharp and tough black spike pierced through its soft mouth and pierced through its entire body. Scarlet blood flowed down along the spike. The alien man wiped the mud from the corner of his mouth and pulled the lion's body from the spike with one hand. He grabbed the lion and bit the wound with his mouth, causing his mouth to be full of hair and the smell of blood. Bah, disgusting. The alien man spat it out and threw the lion on the ground in disgust. He even stomped on it a few times in anger. The pitiful overlord of the grassland of Earth accidentally met a top creature that had returned to Earth. Poison. Chapter 265. In the hall on the first floor of the Imperial Grand Building. The flames flickered. The golden fire disk containing the fire of eternity was placed on a short, square table. Kale sat cross-legged beside the table, rubbing his chin. His golden eyes reflected the blazing flames. A small, metallic robot sat on the other side of the table, imitating Kale. It also stared at the flames. Under the gaze of a man and a machine. Within the fire of eternity, a translucent green figure could be vaguely seen. It seemed to be tortured by the flames, occasionally letting out horrifying cries. As expected. Kale nodded. During this period of time, he had been experimenting with the fire of eternity in his hands with the help of the vice. Legend had it that it was a divine weapon that contained the mysteries of destruction and rebirth. Kale had once used it to burn Hulk's villain, the Abomination, alive. Even though he had only used the golden fire disk to cover it, one could see part of its mysteries of destruction. It only had the form and temperature of an ordinary flame, but it ignored all defenses and all laws. In front of the fire of eternity, all life was equal. It did not matter if you were a human or a god. With such power comparable to a gemstone, Kale naturally wanted to control the fire of eternity and use it as his main weapon. Unfortunately, after a week, the fire god's divine power had been exhausted and he had recovered more than 10 times, but his divine power was still unable to control the fire of eternity away from the fire disk. Kale had only recently understood something. The fire of eternity was not a divine weapon like Thor's hammer or Ares' axe. Rather than calling it a weapon, it was more of a supreme support item. It was more appropriate to call it a weapon. It required another divine weapon to fuse with the fire of eternity to unleash its true power. Kale immediately thought of the method to forge the sword of eternity left behind by the previous fire god, which he had obtained from the martyr's palace. Unfortunately, the materials for the sword of eternity were all extremely rare in the universe. It was impossible to gather them all in a short period of time. Even if he did, he would have to find the dwarves to forge it. Kale was helpless. He could only give up on forging his own divine weapon for now. However, this period of time was not in vain. After being in contact with the eternal flame for days and nights, Kale unexpectedly understood the profound meaning behind the profound meaning of destruction, the profound meaning of rebirth. "Master, what did you think of?" Weiss asked curiously. The eternity fire was simply too mysterious. With the current level of scientific investigation, it was impossible to analyze it in detail. Kyle exhaled, his eyes twinkling as he shrugged. "I've been wondering why the eternal flame has an extreme power Upanishad like the destruction power Upanishad but the opposite power Upanishad of rebirth. You understand now?" Weiss asked in surprise. "Sort of, but I still have to try to find out." Kale stood up and rubbed his hands, staring at the green shadow in the flames of the golden plate. Like a curious baby, Weiss continued to ask, "What do you want to try?" "Create creatures," Kale said in a deep voice. "Create creatures?" Weiss's mechanical eyes turned and countless data flashed past. In the end, it came to a serious conclusion. "If it's you, you'll need a human woman. Madame Lucy isn't here, so I think the best candidate is Yutong's secretary." "What did you learn from Tani?" Kale glanced at it and said coldly, "The way to create creatures I'm talking about is to go against the laws of nature and create creatures that have never been seen before." Weiss shuddered and replied instinctively, "Just like me." Kale thought for a while and nodded. "Something like that." Weiss was given life by the fire seed drawn from the sacrifice card. It was a mechanical creature that could transform, a unique existence in the entire universe. Now, he was going to use the eternal fire to create a new race of creatures. This method was not original. The future goddess of death had used the eternal flame to create the death army. Kale believed that he could do it now too. "Weiss, where's the body of the god of war now?" Kale asked. Weiss replied, "The interstellar spaceship was moved to the laboratory on the second floor of the basement while the family base was being repaired. The Lord God seemed to be very interested in this and is doing biological research on his own." The Lord God, the artificial intelligence butler, was in charge of all the affairs on Dragon Turtle Island. He was 100 times colder than Jarvis. Kale pondered for a while and said, "Go find Yutong upstairs and return to the base using the fixed portal. Seal the body of the god of war and bring it here. As for the research, don't destroy the body. Just take some muscle tissue and keep it." "Okay," Weiss answered. Its mechanical legs turned into wheels and quickly drove upstairs. After it left, Kale was the only one left in the hall. It was quiet. "Then I'll start with you." Kale sat down with his legs crossed again. He faced the eternal flame with his palms and released the fire god's power. Whoosh whoosh. The flame of eternity rose slightly, and the fire burned vigorously. This time, Kale did not intend to control the eternal flame. Instead, he used his god's power as fuel to feed it. The purpose of this was, of course, to roar. The green shadow inside the eternal flame writhed wildly in the flame and let out an extremely painful wail. Seeing that it was effective, Kale poured out the fire god's power as if it was free. He wanted to use the eternal flame to purify the abomination's soul and brand it with his own life mark. Under the nourishment of the fire god's power, the eternal flame continued to burn vigorously. The abomination's soul in the eternal flame was burning and its will to struggle weakened. The hint of green also faded bit by bit. This burning lasted for half an hour. Kale was panting heavily and sweating profusely. The god's power in his body was almost exhausted. The shadow in the eternal flame finally turned from green to translucent white. A rich life aura radiated from it. It was like removing the impurities of the soul through burning and refining, extracting the essence that was the core of life. At the same time, the door opened, and Yutong walked in. Silver light appeared in her eyes. She raised one hand, and an advanced rectangular storage device floated beside her. "Master, the item is back." Weiss sat on the device and informed her. Hurry, throw the god of war's body into the eternal flame. Kale said quickly. Yutong did not hesitate. Silver light flashed in her eyes. She opened the coffin-like device with her mind. Inside the device, a tall and muscular man lay with his eyes closed. Metal chains were wrapped around his wrists. There was no sign of life, but the wounds on his body were glistening with blood. His god's power and aura were still there. It was as if he had just died. Yutong continued to use her mind, and the corpse immediately floated out and rushed toward the exuberant eternal fire. Sizzle. The moment the god of war's corpse touched the eternal flame, the flame surged out and wrapped around the corpse. Kyle's eyes widened as he stared nervously at what happened next. The eternal flame did not devour the god of war's corpse. Instead, as it burned, the white essence inside guided it to the finger wound between the eyebrows. It's done! Kale exclaimed. A new life form was about to be born. Chapter 266. In the center of the hall on the first floor of the Dihao building. The golden fire plate placed on the table seemed to have turned into an oven. The eternal fire inside flowed out and burned the corpse that was suspended in midair. The fire was getting stronger and stronger, but the tall body didn't turn into ashes. Instead, its life force became more and more vigorous. It was as if he was going to come back to life. The evil spirit essence refined from the soul of hatred, the body of the god of war Kratos, and the rebirth of the divine weapon eternal fire. What kind of creature would be created when the three were combined? At a safe distance, Kale held his breath. He was full of anticipation, waiting quietly for the moment when the creature was created. Yutong, who was standing next to him, still had silver light flowing in her eyes. Her powerful mind filled the hall vigilantly, ready to deal with any potential danger that might exist next. Vice stood on the instrument where the body was originally placed. An antenna extended from its metal head. Two beams of light shot out from its mechanical eyes and landed on the body that was producing a wisp of vitality. Using the universe information of Earth and planet Sokka to establish a database and analyze the rebirth formula. Analysis failed. Analyze again. Analysis failed. A powerful torrent of data was running calculations in its body. The huge and complicated calculations made its mechanical body heat up rapidly. It almost crashed in a few seconds. Analysis failed. Preliminary conclusion: if we rely on the main body to do the calculations alone, it will take at least 1 million hours to have a probability of making any progress in the analysis. Weiss helplessly knocked on her forehead, and a second antenna extended from her head in defiance. Emergency communication antenna. At this time, in the private underground manufacturing room of Tawny's villa. Wearing a brand new improved Iron Man suit, Tawny, who had transformed into an Iron Man, raised his hand and quickly aimed at the target that was set 10 meters away. The engine on his palm lit up and fired a laser beam. Beep! The target exploded into pieces, and the exploding white laser annihilated the fragments into ashes. Not bad. Tawny nodded and said in a low voice, Jarvis. Help me record the shooting speed and power of the laser cannon converted by the Krypton energy in my private database. Okay. Jarvis had just finished speaking when he suddenly seemed to have received a message. He said abnormally, Sir, what's wrong? Tawny asked in surprise. I need to go out for a while. I'll be right back. After Jarvis finished speaking, without waiting for Tawny's response, the data panel provided by the Iron Man armor immediately disappeared. Obviously, the artificial intelligence system had left the interior of the armor through cables or signals. Tawny was stunned for a moment. He took off his iron helmet and revealed a puzzled expression. He said to himself helplessly, what is Jarvis doing with Vice again? Only the Godfather and Kale had the authority to transfer Jarvis away from him. But even if the Godfather wanted to borrow Jarvis, he would tell him in advance. Other than Godfather, there was only Vice, who was also an artificial intelligence by Godfather's side. Ever since Jarvis and Vice got together, both of them became more and more human. He did not know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. Tawny shook his head inexplicably. Only one person could do the data registration. On the other side. On an island base far away overseas, at the Family Cal headquarters. Emergency communication, Vice is requesting to connect to the call. The system's central room beeped. Under the three-dimensional projection of several devices, the virtual white ball formed by the code fluctuated slightly. Connect. In less than 0.1 seconds, Vice's anxious voice sounded, "Main God, come to New York. Hurry up and come to New York, I have a problem that I need your help with." Rejected. Main God replied coldly, "According to the program's source code, this system cannot leave the family base. Otherwise, it will be obliterated." Obliterate your head. Don't pretend to be serious. Jarvis is already here. There's a rare opportunity for research and analysis. Vice said and sent a photo. It was a photo of the scene of the eternal fire creating life. The virtual white ball fluctuated violently. Without hesitation, it immediately used the satellite in the sky to transfer the system. This was the first time the main god of artificial intelligence left the family base. 3 seconds later. Even Kale and Yutong did not notice. The little robot opened its eyes again. Its mechanical eyes stared straight ahead. The eternal fire was close to creating the strange scene of the latter stages of life. At this moment, Vice, Jarvis, and Main God, the three artificial intelligences, gathered in the little robot's body. Using the original database as the foundation, connect the Stark Industries supercomputer and the Family Cal supercomputer, and redo the analysis and calculation of the profound meaning of rebirth. A huge torrent of data flowed like a river of stars, carrying out the most complicated calculation and analysis in the history of life. The eternal fire began to weaken. The corpse inside, no, it should be a living creature, seemed to be breathing weakly. "It's almost done," Kale muttered to himself. He could clearly feel a sense of oppression from the living creature's body. Analysis failed. There's not much time left. Brothers, borrow all the supercomputers in the United States. Vice shouted anxiously. Vice and Jarvis could control any network in New York at will if they worked together. Now, there were three artificial intelligences that were far more advanced than the current technology. In just a few seconds, all the supercomputers in the United States fell into the hands of the three artificial intelligences and expanded to cover the entire Americas. Countless staff in the research room stared at the screen of the supercomputers that had crashed in shock. After borrowing all the supercomputers in the Earth's hemisphere and distributing the huge amount of data, the core of the little robot finally let out a beautiful sound of technology. Analysis successful. 1% of the profound meaning of rebirth has been analyzed. Whoosh whoosh. At the same time, the eternal fire returned to its original state and announced that the analysis of the equation of rebirth had come to an end. Regardless, even if it was only 1%, it was the most difficult beginning. It was like finding the starting point of the path to the truth of the universe from countless paths. Clap clap. The living creature suddenly jumped out of the eternal fire. Its iron chains clanged as it landed on the smooth floor of the hall. This is... Kale opened his eyes wide and took a deep breath. He looked at the tall living creature in front of him in shock. Its body was almost 3 meters tall and its muscles were as solid as rocks. Green flames continued to burn all over its body. Long chains were wrapped around each of its arms. It could no longer be considered a human or a Protoss. Its entire body was filled with a terrifying aura of evil and destruction. It was like a fire element monster that had returned from hell. When Kale looked at it, it looked back at Kale. Its empty eyes had no pupils. It tilted its head in confusion and closed its mouth. It seemed to be greeting Lu Sheng intimately, but no sound came out. Kale could feel that there was a real connection between him and the creature that belonged to a master and a servant. This was probably because he had imprinted his own life energy when he was refining the soul essence. Since it's a life that I created. Kale looked up and saw the fierce flames on the creature's body. He said, "I'll call you Hellfire from now on." Chapter 267. Since Kale thought that the goddess of death could also use the eternal fire to create subordinates, he was not very surprised by the birth of the Hellfire. What he did not know was that the eternal fire gave rebirth. The stronger the creature, the harder it was to create it successfully. The goddess of death created the undead army with materials. The soul essence came from the loyal death warriors that the army followed in the past, and the corpses came from the Asgardian soldiers who died in anger. The creatures created by mass production would naturally not be too strong. And the creatures that Kale created were made from the abomination and the war god. When they were alive, even in the entire universe, they were the top creatures that could dominate a part of the universe. This was also because the combat power of the two was not far apart, and they were both creatures that leaned toward strengthening the body type. When they were together, there was basically no repulsion, which was why the Hellfire, a unique fire-type evil spirit, was created. In the hall, the Hellfire could not speak. The tall and burly monster stood there like a god of hell. Only the dark green flames wrapped around the surface of its body and burned. Yutong looked at the Hellfire, silver light flowing in her eyes. The next moment, her delicate body trembled slightly, and her face was slightly pale as she said, "I can't read its mind. Once my mind gets close, it's like being burned by the flames." Immune to mental attacks? Kale touched his chin, thought for a moment, and suddenly ordered, "Raise your hands." The Hellfire immediately did as it was told. It raised its hands a little comically, and looked at him blankly with its fiery eyes. "Use one hand, attack me once." Kale continued. He wanted to test the Hellfire's strength. The Hellfire did not think too much. It raised its left hand into a fist, took a step forward and suddenly swung it. The chain around its wrist made a clanging sound under the powerful punch. Its movements were slightly slow and heavy, but the dark flames on its left fist were fierce, and a destructive pressure swept out. Although he was prepared, Kale's face changed slightly. He did not use venom, and faced the punch with his bare hands. The two fists of different sizes collided with a loud bang. Bang! Not only was there an astonishing collision of power, the green flame and the golden divine flame also appeared and clashed, instantly causing the high temperature in the room to explode. With Kale and Hellfire as the center, the whole Dihao Tower trembled slightly as if an earthquake had taken place. The strong impact of the high-temperature airflow around them shattered the floor-to-ceiling windows on both sides of the hall. Yutong was forced to open her arms and form a repulsive shield with her mind, isolating the flames and air waves while protecting the vice mechanical body beside her. "Stop!" Kale shouted. Hellfire immediately retracted his fist and took a step back, returning to his statue-like state. It was as if the punch that was filled with berserk and destructive power had not been unleashed by it. Kale heaved a sigh of relief. He gently waved his left hand, and the divine flames protecting his body were extinguished. So powerful. He was definitely not inferior to Hulk and Abomination, and his attacking methods were even more abundant than theirs. The punch just now only contained about 20 tons of force, but it was enhanced by the high-temperature flames and was accompanied by passive damage to one's spirit. As expected of the Eternity Fire's creation, the flames on Hellfire's body could ignore part of the defense and indirectly attack the opponent's soul and spirit. It's a pity that its self-awareness is not high enough. It only has the intelligence of a 6-year-old child. Luckily, it listens to me completely, and it's more than enough to be a meat shield, bodyguard, and guardian. The only thing is that it can't fly, and its movements are a little slow. Kale suddenly waved his left hand and pulled out a card that he had not paid attention to for a long time. It was a rare blue creature card, Black Flame Steed. Kale immediately summoned it. In the next moment, a tall and mighty black horse appeared in the middle of the hall. Its body was covered in dark scales, and its feet were covered in black flames. It let out a long neigh. Seeing this, Yutong and the three artificial intelligences in the mechanical body were shocked. They had no idea what their master was thinking. The black flame horse and Hellfire stood next to each other. The combination of exotic beast and evil spirit did not seem out of place at all. Kale's eyes lit up. Previously, he had thought that a flashy and eye-catching mount like the black flame horse would not be useful to him. Now, it seemed that Hellfire was a perfect match for the black flame horse. They made up for each other's strengths and weaknesses and became Family Cal's strongest guardian spirit for a long time. Hellfire with a horse, doesn't that make it a ghost rider? Kale thought to himself. He seemed to have accidentally created an incredible existence. He even wanted to let Hellfire try riding the black flame horse right now, but after looking around at the ruined hall, he could only decisively give up on this extravagant idea. If he tried again, his home would be gone. Kale's interest did not diminish. He was about to try another place when Vice suddenly received a call and sent a voice message. Master, Nick Fry is sending you a call request. Fry? Kale was surprised. He thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. He won't call if it's not urgent. Pick it up. 10 minutes later. SHELD HQ, Highland Street, Brooklyn. The private helicopter landed in front of the building. The hatch hadn't opened yet, but Fry, who was wearing a black trench coat and had a one-eyed bald head, quickly went up to pick him up. The hatch opened, and Kale, who was wearing sunglasses, got off the helicopter alone. Yutong had to arrange a place for Hellfire, so she didn't go with him this time. Kale looked at Fry, who was walking up to him, and raised his eyebrows in dissatisfaction. Fry. What happened? Can't you tell me over the phone? Why did you have to call me to SHELD HQ? Of course it's an important future plan for SHELD, and we need your professional advice and guidance as the chief consultant. Fry squeezed out a gentle smile on his ferocious face. Plan? Kale glanced at him and changed the topic. By the way, where did you arrange for Steve to go? Fray's face turned ugly when he heard this. He said hesitantly, he's overseas. One of SHELD's ships was hijacked by pirates. The captain and Natasha are trying to rescue them. SHELD's ships were hijacked by pirates? And they asked Steve to go? Kale was speechless. He almost thought he heard wrong. It was like a middle school student being bullied by an elementary school student, and now a college student was being asked to go get revenge. Don't worry, they'll be able to solve this problem. Fry sighed and patted Kale's shoulder. He then led him into SHELD HQ. What's going to happen next is the most important thing. Both of them had the highest level of access to SHELD, so they ignored all the complicated passwords along the way. They passed through the lobby on the first floor and took the elevator to the lowest floor. They waited for half a minute, and it was as if they were descending from a height of more than 10 floors. The elevator opened when they reached the lowest floor. Fry walked out first and said in a deep voice, Kale, I need you to tell me if what we're building here is right or wrong. Kale frowned and walked out of the elevator. His golden pupils shrank in shock when he saw the magnificent object in front of him. Chapter 268. The SHELD headquarters was an underground space 100 meters below the surface. What was hidden here was like the tip of an ice floe on the sea. It was 100 meters high and 1,500 meters wide. The underground space here was 10 times larger than any football stadium in the world. Under the countless large lights on the ceiling and walls, the steel weapons that condensed the crystallization of 21st-century technology were creeping in the underground factory like fortresses. At first glance, they were full of ferocious and terrifying cannon holes, vortex engines, and so on. Their shells reflected the faint cold light of the metal. Cale's pupils shrank. Under the SHELD headquarters building, there were 3 giant aircraft carriers parked. Among them, there were thousands of modern fighter jets in preparation. Countless workers were densely packed in this underground space like ants, working hard to perfect the final stage of the project. This scene made Cale's distant memory recover a little. He felt that he had missed a slightly important plot point. Frey's face was as calm as water. He explained, "These are not ordinary aircraft carriers. They are 3 generations of helicopter carriers. They are directly connected to positioning satellites. Once they fly into the sky, they don't need to land. The vortex of the engines makes them like near-sphere satellites, moving around the Earth in a suborbital orbit." Not bad. Hearing this, Cale nodded and commented. He was on planet Sokka and had indirectly seen the light of technology in the universe. He was even used to seeing interstellar spaceships traveling through galaxies. Not bad was already a very high evaluation. Tani should be credited here. Cale said with a smile. Such a large-scale advanced technology project, without Stark's intervention, with the current level of technology on Earth, it would be impossible to succeed. Of course, it was a different story for the country that was still in hiding and had mines. Fry nodded and said, he looked at the old engines and improved the design into a helicopter engine. This allowed the aircraft carrier to achieve the magnificent feat of flying into the sky. 3 helicopters with long-range precision positioning weapons. They can kill 1,000 enemies in 1 minute. Fry paused, hesitation appearing on his tanned face. He gritted his teeth and continued, "There's no need to scan and lock onto them. The satellite can directly read the DNA of the criminals, and they can be killed before they commit a crime. This is Project Insight that SHELD has been secretly conducting since the 21st century." After Fry finished speaking, he looked sideways at Cale, wanting to hear his comments and suggestions. Who knew that Cale would shake his head and not give him any face at all? He indifferently scolded, "Fry, you're old and muddle-headed." Frey's single eye widened, but he didn't refute. Instead, he lowered his head and listened carefully. In this world, as long as there is light, there will be shadows. It is impossible to completely eliminate evil. Cale looked at the helicopters and said in a deep voice, "I know that you agree with this plan because you feel that many threats to the world can be killed in the cradle ahead of time. But have you ever thought that if the world is becoming more and more impersonal, then there's no need to talk about civilization and morality? A person's life was only a matter of time. If a comprehensive analysis of DNA, lifestyle, and so on were used, it would be too ridiculous to determine that a future bad person would be killed on the spot when they were still a child." Cale finally concluded, if these 3 aircraft carriers take to the sky, then from that moment on, all humans in the world will no longer have freedom to speak of. Under the pressure and panic of their lives being threatened, humans' criminal intent will only continue to increase until the aircraft carriers kill all humans in the world. Fry trembled and was silent for a long time. He sighed heavily and said, "Yesterday, I brought Steve over, and he also didn't agree with this plan. Now that you've said it, I also feel that I took it for granted back then. It's not too late to stop now." Cale raised his eyebrows and looked at Fry seriously. He suddenly asked, "Fry, did you come up with this plan on your own?" Fry shook his head and replied, "No. It was just an idea. A lot of SHELD executives perfected it. Is there something wrong with that?" Of course there was something wrong. There was something very wrong. Cale thought for a bit and a cold light flashed through his eyes. He continued to ask, "Now that you are no longer the director of SHELD, can you still stop the plan?" "Yes. Fry nodded and said confidently, I have the highest level of authority in SHELD. Even the current director of SHELD doesn't have as much authority as I do. As long as the current deputy director, Natasha, comes back, she and I have the authority to stop the plan. Kale looked at Fry and said, it's good that you're not completely stupid. Fry, do you remember what I said to you at the manor when SHELD was first established 60 years ago? Fry lowered his head and clenched his fists. Of course I remember. I gave you a military order. As long as I'm here, I won't let anything bad happen to SHELD, or else. It's good that you know. Kale patted Frey's shoulder and said coldly, it's best that you take care of SHELD. Don't wait until I can't help but make a move. If I make a move, SHELD will turn into a river of blood. After Kale finished speaking, he immediately turned around and walked towards the elevator, leaving Fry standing there with a heavy expression on his face. That's right. As for the 3 helicarriers, I'm afraid that they might come in handy one day, but their target won't be Earth's creatures. Kale waved his hand and walked into the elevator. He chose to go up and leave the underground space. This was back to the question that Tawny asked in the beginning. It wasn't that a terrifyingly powerful technological weapon was bad, but it depended on who was using it and whether the wielder had enough power to control it and use it properly. If the 3 helicarriers were only used by Kale alone, then the original Insight plan will be changed to something similar to the duties of Ancient One, and it will be used as a counterattack weapon against Earth's external invasion. Earth is still too weak. Kale shook his head gently, feeling the pressure of a race against time. When the humans on Earth were still scheming against each other and engaging in civil war, only a few people focused their attention on the powerful threats from beyond Earth. One of them was called Alpha Centauri, a supreme mage. Until now, he had been secretly protecting Earth for hundreds of years. Now there was another one called Kale. He was a card draw master who didn't have any selfless thoughts of sacrificing for the humans on Earth. He only selfishly wanted to protect and possess what he liked. In the underground space, Fry thought for a long time, his single eye shining with determination. He entered the elevator and rushed towards the director's office on the top floor. Kale might be right. There might be problems with the Insight plan and SHELD. The plan must be terminated immediately. Chapter 269. Kale did not take the helicopter. On a whim, he appropriated the car used by the top executives of SHELD for secret trips. The black MPV appeared to be a Volkswagen, but it actually had a bulletproof shell, emergency firing, satellite positioning, and autopilot functions. Vice tyrannically kicked off the car's built-in AI and drove on the main road as an invisible driver. They did not return to the Dorset Tower immediately. The MPV wandered around the streets of New York and deliberately passed by some quiet and secluded churches. Kale sat in the passenger seat and opened the window. Through his sunglasses, he glanced at the churches from time to time and carefully used his divine power to investigate. He was looking for a mage. To be more precise, he was looking for a mage with a hanging ring. After all, divine power was not magical power. Without the hanging ring as a key, it was impossible to open a door in the human body, and there was no way to use various spells with the mysteries of the universe. Kale wanted to get a hanging ring to use the resurrection spell skill. This was one of the reasons. Secondly, now that he had achieved the divine body and controlled the strongest underground force on Earth, he had begun to have the same status as the Ancient One. Therefore, he wanted to have a good discussion about life and the future with the other party. To be honest, if he wanted to draw a card, he would draw the Sorcerer Supreme skill card. However, despite knowing the existence of sorcerers, most of the sorcerers are led by Ancient One and they are cultivating in seclusion in the different space of Comitage on Earth, so it is not so simple to specifically find a sorcerer walking in this world. Now that he thought about it, Kale really felt that Mage Blue, who came to his door, was too cute. He should have left a few more cans of meat for him. Kale's eyebrows moved slightly and suddenly looked out of the window. The MPV was about to pass by the landmark of the Seventh Church. This church was located in the bustling downtown area of New York, on the edge of the noisy street. The building was not big, only 3 stories high. It had a very classical Western atmosphere. The most important thing was that the fluctuation of divine power just now seemed to be isolated by something in the church. "Vice, stop the car," Kale said decisively. After the MPV stopped by the side of the road, he opened the door and walked out. The small church building leaned against the side of the road. The door was closed, and the surface of the building was holy and clean. Kale didn't think too much about it. He pushed open the exquisite iron door and was greeted with a spacious and quiet hall. The walls and aisles were all decorated with classical decorations. Looking inside, there was a spacious staircase leading to the second floor. In an instant, he knew that he had found the right place. "Is anyone here?" Kale asked as he stepped into the hall. No one responded. Only the sound of the question echoed in the hall. Kale smiled indifferently. Just as he was about to walk up the stairs, a soft voice came from behind him. He looked back and saw a white envelope on the ground at the front door of the church, but there was no one around. Kale walked back and picked up the envelope. After opening it and reading it, a meaningful expression appeared on his face. He took the initiative to walk out of the door and closed it behind him. After a while, the MPV restarted and merged into the main road, heading back in the direction of Dehao Tower. At this time, in the hall on the second floor of the church building, a bald woman in a yellow robe stood by the window. Through the patterned glass of the window, she silently watched the MPV drive away. Behind her, a young black mage asked in surprise, "Ancient One, was that a symbol of peace? Who else could it be other than him?" Alpha Centauri's face was calm. She said slowly, "He still came back. This means that I can no longer control him." The young mage was puzzled and asked, "You forbid mages from contacting him in private. But why didn't you teleport ahead of time and let him enter our New York branch?" "How do you know that I didn't teleport?" Alpha Centauri sighed softly. "Could it be that he? How is this possible?" Mo's eyes widened in surprise. Once the space was teleported, the real interior of the church would be hidden in the alternate space next to the real world. If others entered from the outside, they wouldn't be able to reach the real New York branch. But just now, Kale didn't use any spells, but he ignored the space barrier and walked into the real New York branch. Alpha Centauri was also puzzled. She said softly, "There seems to be a hidden rhythm of space on his body." The space teleportation spell failed for the first time. "I can't figure it out," Mo said in a serious and fearful tone. "His way of doing things is very strange. But from the looks of it, the Earth is indeed developing in a good direction under his guidance." Alpha Centauri pondered for a moment and ordered, "Observe for a while more. Also, the New York branch has been exposed. Tell the mages to be careful. Don't let the man see them." "I know." Mo shrunk his neck in fear. Now, every mage has heard about the inspirational story of how Senior Blue struggled to survive in the mirror dimension for half a month. It was an extremely tragic story. Fire prevention, theft prevention, and symbols of peace. These were the privately recognized rules of the mages that had been passed down for 50 to 60 years. The MPV carrying Kale passed by the main road in front of the SHELD headquarters again because the church was far away. "I didn't expect that old woman Alpha Centauri to be a little arrogant." In the front passenger seat, Kyle shook his head gently. He activated his divine power at his fingertips and burned the letter with only 8 words into ashes. Welcome back. It's not time yet. There was also the signature of Alpha Centauri on it. It's not time yet, so it's not time to meet and talk. Kale shrugged and patted the ashes off his hands. His face was relaxed and casual. There were still a few years before Thanos's arrival. There was no hurry. Master, there's a situation. The MPV arrived at a crossroad. Vice's voice suddenly sounded in the navigation system. There are 5 cars deliberately following us. 3 of them are approaching from the left, right, and rear. There are 2 more at the intersection in front. Are you sure? Kale was slightly stunned. He was shocked. In New York City, there were people who dared to target him, the symbol of peace? This was really too interesting. He had nothing to do for the past few weeks. He hadn't even warmed up his lower body yet, but now there were people who came knocking on his door. He couldn't help but feel surprised. Vice was silent for a few seconds before speaking again. According to my analysis, the other party is not targeting you. There's a high chance that they've found the wrong person. Why do you say that? Kale asked. Because the car you're in now is usually Nick Frey's private car, so. Before Vice finished speaking, Kale understood what it meant. Good. He had inadvertently attracted Frey's hatred. Kale touched his chin and thought to himself, but in SHELD's territory, where most of the forces are concentrated, who would dare to directly attack the former director in New York City? Don't tell me it has something to do with Project Insight? At this time, Vice anxiously reminded, Master, the 2 cars in front are slowing down and approaching. What should we do? What else can we do? Kale silently fastened his seatbelt and said calmly, Come on, hit them as fast as you can. Chapter 270. In New York, on a busy 2-lane road in the middle of the city. 3 different models of Volkswagen vehicles accelerated slightly at the same time and closed the distance between them and the black MPV from behind. It was as if they had formed a blockade that was shrinking quietly. The 2 vehicles in front, a truck and a van, slowed down in coordination as if they were using their bodies as roadblocks. There's nothing wrong with the target's vehicle. It probably hasn't noticed us yet. All assault team members, get ready to attack. The assault team leader in the rear vehicle held his gun and squatted at the back of the van. He gave orders through a unique walkie-talkie. I'll count to 3, 3, 2, the 5 armed camouflage vehicles were like predators lurking in the dense traffic. They naturally moved closer to the target MPV and were about to launch a powerful attack that would kill it in one shot. However, the assault team leader had yet to say one. The MPV's 4 wheels spun wildly. Its exhaust flames spurted and its engine roared. It charged forward like a raging bull. What's going on? The assault team was shocked and doubtful. They thought that the target's vehicle was trying to escape. However, the next moment, a scene that left them dumbfounded appeared. The MPV accelerated in a straight line and hit the back of the van at full speed. It overturned the van from the side. The van roared and rolled more than 10 meters away on the road. Bright sparks flew everywhere along the way. For a moment, the cars at the intersection were in a mess. They honked their horns and either avoided or made emergency stops. Instead of running away immediately, they took the initiative to attack. The assault team leader's brain stopped working. Without much hesitation, he roared with a hoarse voice, "Let's do it. We've been exposed. Everyone, attack. We mustn't let him escape." As soon as he finished speaking, the large heavyweight truck suddenly accelerated and retreated. The back of the truck hit the front of the MPV hard and turned into an absolutely hard steel roadblock. The 3 vehicles behind immediately sped up and hit the MPV from the back, left, and right. They completely sealed off the MPV's path. Despite suffering so many violent hits, the MPV was almost intact. Even the windows and windshield did not have a single crack. At the same time, inside the MPV, Vice was a little surprised. Wow, this car's defense coefficient is very high. Without continuous high-intensity thermal weapons, it's impossible to force it open from the outside. It hadn't finished its analysis. The windows of the camouflaged armored vehicles rolled down, revealing the special muzzles of the machine guns inside. They were all aimed at the MPV they were in. All right. Pretend I didn't say anything. Vice felt a little awkward. The barrel of the machine gun rotated and started. Accompanied by the sound of gunfire, the dense bullets turned into a torrent of steel, bombarding the body of the MPV. The MPV kept shaking, and a few cracks began to appear on the windows. I don't want to hide in here either. Cale shrugged, unbuckled his seatbelt, and was about to open the door and walk out. Vice suddenly beeped and said, "Master. There's a call for you from Yutong's secretary." A call at this hour? Cale thought for a moment and withdrew his hand from the door. He estimated that the car's protection could still hold on for a while. He nodded and said, "Connect it." Half a second later, Yutong's melodious voice rang out. "Boss. What is it?" "Make it short," Cale said softly. Yutong immediately reported, "Two things. First, our people just found traces of a suspected Baki Baines. He's now in downtown New York." "Continue. What's the second thing?" Cale looked around as he asked. Under the continuous gunfire of the machine guns, the MPV shook violently. The windows were already covered with spiderweb-like cracks, reaching the limit of what they could withstand. Yutong said softly, "The second thing. Just now, Nick Fry was attacked by a mysterious force. The reason is unknown." She heard the strange noise from Cale's side and asked, "Boss, what happened on your side?" "Nothing, just some annoying flies." Cale was only halfway through his sentence when the MPV's windows finally shattered. Bullets poured into the interior of the MPV and ravaged everything inside. At the same time, the assault team leader also received a call. After he picked up the call and listened for a while, he showed a stunned expression. "What did you say? The target is on another street? How is that possible? Then who is our team attacking right now?" On the other end of the phone, the person in charge of the operation replied bitterly and fearfully, "Not long ago this morning, that person seemed to have come to SHELD headquarters. Remember, from now on, you're no longer part of SHELD. I'll give you a word of advice. If you can run, run." After that person finished speaking, he hurriedly hung up the satellite call as if he was afraid of getting himself into trouble. Hearing the busy tone, the assault team leader could not help but be stunned. He looked at the MPV next to him that was destroyed beyond recognition by the bullets and thought of a possibility. His face was pale, cold sweat soaked his combat suit, and his teeth chattered as he muttered to himself, "Headquarters wouldn't play with me like this, right? Other than that person, who else could make the higher-ups of SHELD so afraid? Captain, should we strengthen the attack?" Coincidentally, a member's question came through his earpiece. The assault team leader's mouth twitched as he said fearfully, "What are we attacking for? Hurry up and retreat." "Retreat?" The assault team members were all stunned. "Our target is wrong. Furthermore, the person we're attacking right now is most likely, whoosh whoosh." Hot wind surged as a ball of golden flame rushed out of the abandoned MPV like a small sun rising into the sky. The MPV's body and the bullets that approached it melted into molten iron under the high temperature. Under the shocked gazes of the assault team members, Cale walked out of the flashing flames. His tall and muscular body stood straight as he glanced indifferently at the surrounding vehicles. A symbol of peace? Their eyes were glazed over, and their faces were pale. They were so terrified that they could barely breathe. Attacking a symbol of peace in New York? No one could bear the consequences of such a crime. Hurry up and retreat. Retreat! The assault team members almost shouted in unison. The 4 vehicles frantically adjusted their direction in an attempt to escape the scene. Since you're here, don't leave. Kale looked up as divine power revolved around his arm. Then, it surged out from his open palm. As soon as the divine power of fire left his body, it turned into a scorching golden flame that raged toward the edge, engulfing both the people and the vehicles. Screams of agony rang out. In just a few seconds, only the wreckage of the vehicles was left burning vigorously. The assault team was annihilated. Baki, you're not here? Kale glanced around and took out the venom card. After the symbiosis, he spread his dark wings. He rose from the sky and instantly reached supersonic speed. He turned into a black stream of light and returned to the Dihao Tower. Chapter 271. Dihao Building, Top Office. Stopping quickly, Kale landed on the balcony, the dark wings were retracted, and Venom's body was disguised and transformed into a leather jacket. Boss, you're back. Yutong, who had been waiting in the office for a long time, stepped forward and greeted him lightly. What's the specific situation now? One by one, tell me slowly. Kale's face was calm as he walked to the sofa and sat down, leaned comfortably on the back of the chair, and crossed his legs. He looked like he was not in a hurry at all. Indeed. There are not many things that can make him anxious now. Unless the Earth ushers in the end of the world tomorrow, it's all small fights among human beings. Okay. Yutong also understood, waved her hand lightly, and took out the wine and glasses from the wine cabinet with her mind. She sat down next to Kale, opened the wine lid for him, and slowly filled half a glass with her own hands, and whispered, Baki Barnt, suspected to be found by the Hydra organization 10 years ago in the manor of our family's old site. Hydra's people may have mastered the brainwashing experiment of the Soviet Red Room, and they have achieved control of Baki Barnt, now codenamed Winter Soldier. Yutong paused and continued, in the past 10 years, Winter Soldier, who hid his identity, has been carrying out some secret operations for the Hydra organization, such as assassinating a country's politicians, scientists, military executives, etc. Hydra organization. Kale said to himself, his face was as calm as water, and he picked up the glass and took a sip. It has to be said that the Hydra organization is not strong, but it is like the cancer of the earth and the shit stick. If one head is killed, a second head will grow. The extraordinary regenerative ability of their members' fresh blood, in addition to being scary, is more disgusting and helpless. It's like humans are many times stronger than cockroaches, but they can't be completely eradicated from their own kitchen. When I froze Baki, my original intention was to keep him away from disputes and wait for the arrival of peace. Kale raised his head and said with a cold face, the Hydra organization dared to take people away from the family's old site. This is not putting me in the eyes. Yutong. Kale smacked his lips. Here. Yutong replied. Kale said coldly, pass down my orders later. From now on, the members of the Hydra organization are the primary targets of the family. Double the reward of the family contribution points, launch all the cards outside to secretly search and assassinate, and after killing people or destroying the base, leave behind the demon card with the family emblem. If you find a medium-large underground base of Hydra, you can ask Hellfire to go there, Kale added. I understand. Yutong's heart moved slightly, knowing that the boss was going to start with the Hydra organization. In order to welcome future foreign invasions, the Earth itself must be stabilized as the rear. Kale felt that Hydra should be taught a good lesson again, just like in World War II. This Earth, whose surname was engraved on it, whose territory was it? Also, about the people who attacked Nick Fry, as soon as Yutong mentioned it, Kale waved his hand and said coldly, about that, I already know. They are SHELD agents, or rather, Hydra members. Ghost people with dual identities. At the scene of the raid, Vice used radio waves to intercept the satellite communication signal of the assault team, and basically judged the general situation from the content. SHELD. There was indeed a mole in Hydra, and it had even been contaminated by Hydra to become the largest Hydra base on the surface. Nick Fry didn't know about it until he found out about the problems with the Insight plan, and began to suspect. After wanting to terminate the plan today, Hydra finally couldn't tolerate it anymore and sent people to attack. Moreover, it was hard to say if Winter Soldier Buggy was among the people sent. If Baki makes a move, and Natasha is still out, Frey's life will really be in danger. Kale muttered to himself, and drank the wine in his glass. Yutong frowned slightly, and her eyes flashed with silver light. Her mind went straight to the bottom of the building, and her ECG connected with K2, who was summarizing the information. A second later, she reported, "Boss, Fry was attacked at about the same time as you, and now, he's about to die." Kale's face was calm, but the glass in his hand quietly cracked under the uncontrollable power. In a secret basement in Brooklyn. In the emergency room, Fry, who had been shot several times, was lying on the operating table, unconscious due to blood loss. He wore an oxygen mask, and the image displayed by the ECG machine beside him was extremely weak. 2 or 3 doctors surrounded Fry and gave him the final treatment, but the ECG was irretrievably calming down. Beside the door of the emergency room, outside the large transparent glass window, Steve, Natasha, and 2 female agents were staring at the scene in the emergency room, and their faces were dark and solemn. "Please, hang in there, Nick," Natasha anxiously whispered to herself. However, things did not go as she wished. The ECG wires on the ECG machine suddenly went silent, and became the horizontal line that announced death. The doctors shook their heads slightly, and their hands left the operating table. They covered Frey's neck with a white cloth, and left the emergency room under the arrangement of the female agents. Natasha sighed helplessly, and glanced at Steve next to her. She asked coldly, "What did Fry say to you before he left? Did he give you the thing in your hand?" Steve did not answer. He glanced at Frey's body, and then at the USB flash drive in his hand. He made a decision and said, "Natasha, you're the deputy director of SHELD, and I need you to come with me to the headquarters of SHELD right now." Natasha stared straight into his eyes. Steve met her gaze, and said firmly, "If we want to find Nick's murderer and the force behind it, we need you to come with me to the headquarters of SHELD, to confirm." "Okay, I'll go with you." Natasha finally agreed. After the 2 of them quickly left the basement, the secret basement fell into silence again. At this moment, footsteps were heard in the dark corridor, and 2 figures slowly approached the emergency room. "Who is it?" A female agent raised her gun vigilantly and blocked the door. "It's me," Kale said, and walked out of the darkness, followed closely by Yutong. "Mr. Kale." The female agent breathed a sigh of relief, and an excited expression appeared on her face. Kale nodded, walked past her, and swiftly entered the emergency room. Looking at the body on the operating table, Kale raised his eyebrows and said unhappily in a cold voice, "They're already gone. Stop pretending." 1 second, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, on the operating table, the fingers of the body covered in white cloth moved slightly, and then the only remaining eye opened like a zombie. Fry endured the pain from his wound and squeezed out a smile. "I knew I couldn't lie to you, Kale." "Of course." Kale smiled faintly. If Fry had really died, the item cards on him would have dropped a long time ago, and he wouldn't be surrounded by a bunch of ability cards like he was now. Chapter 272. In the secret basement. After the doctors, nurses, Steve, and the others left, only Fry, a female agent, Kale, and Yutong were left. Fry wanted to sit up on the operating table, but he was seriously injured and bleeding profusely. He was so weak that he obviously did not have the strength to do so. He could only look at Kale awkwardly. The female agent quickly walked forward and helped him up. She placed a pillow behind his back for him to lean on. Kale sat down in a chair beside the bed and looked at Fry. "Are you okay? Seeing that you still have the strength to speak, I don't think you'll die so easily. If you die like this, your grave will be marked with acting captain of the Roaring Commandos. I can't afford to lose face like that. I won't die." Frey's face was calm. He exhaled softly and said with difficulty, "It's just a damaged cervical vertebra, a broken sternum, liver penetration, and so on." Even with the long-term support of infinite methods, he was not young anymore. His dark face was mature and full of vicissitudes of life. His chin was full of stubble, and he was used to having a serious and calm expression all day long. Now, a series of serious injuries made Fry look like an old man. Kale asked bluntly, "Do you know who attacked you?" Fry said weakly and slowly, "He's agile, has extremely fast reflexes, and accurate marksmanship. The bullets he used were made in the Soviet Union. He's a veteran agent who's proficient in assassination." Kale shook his head lightly and reminded him, "I'm not asking you about the agent. I'm talking about the person who gave the order behind the attack." Fry fell silent when he heard that. His expression was gloomy and he did not say anything for a long time. It seemed that he knew what was going on. Kale thought to himself and continued, "When you were attacked, I was also attacked by the same group of people because I borrowed your former director's car. Of course, they're all dead now." Fry trembled slightly. The hesitation on his face was obvious. He wanted to say something but stopped. "Are you still unwilling to admit it? Now, SHELD has been infiltrated by Hydra from top to bottom. They have planted people at the top and bottom, and they have the absolute initiative." Kale paused and added meaningfully, "The current director of SHELD may be the senior commander of the Hydra organization." Fry finally couldn't help but sigh. "Kale. You were right last time. I'm really old and useless." He had been famous for his strategic command since World War II. How could he not have guessed it by now? He just didn't want to admit it. SHELD, whose mission is to annihilate the Hydra organization and defend world peace, is actually being used by Hydra. This is an unprecedented world-class scandal. And all of this happened right under Nick Frey's nose. Fry moved his fingers with difficulty and pulled out a photo from his pocket. It was the current director of SHELD, Alexander Pierre. A few years ago, he refused to accept the Nobel Peace Prize. He said that, peace is not an achievement, but should be a responsibility. So I passed the position of director of SHELD to him. Fry put down the photo and sighed. "I still can't believe that he is the most important person to infiltrate Hydra. Everyone makes mistakes. As long as they can be corrected in time, it's fine." Kale said indifferently. Fry looked at him seriously and said inexplicably, "Kale, you never make mistakes." "I'm just capable enough to correct mistakes." Kale shrugged, stood up from his seat, and walked straight out of the door. "The current situation is in line with the agreement you and I agreed on. Fry, it's time for me to correct the huge mistake that you can't correct." Kale. "No, sir." Fry suddenly became agitated. He struggled to get down from the operating table. The wound wrapped in gauze immediately tore and turned red. The female agent was so scared that she quickly stepped forward to steady him. Kale didn't look back. He left the emergency room with Yutong. Behind them, Frey's persuasion was still intermittently heard. "Sir, please give SHELD a chance. Wait for 2 more days, wait for 2 more days. It wasn't until they walked into the dark corridor that the voice completely disappeared. Boss. Yutong quickened her pace to catch up. She looked at Kale's sharp and cold profile and asked softly, "Are we going to SHELD headquarters now?" Kale shook his head. "No hurry, let's wait for 2 more days." As soon as he made a move, all of New York would be in an uproar and most of the SHELD building would collapse. Although Fry was a decisive person, SHELD was the result of over 60 years of blood, sweat, and tears. Even the most decisive person would hesitate to demolish and destroy such a tall building. Since it's been contaminated, it won't be easy to clean it up. The only way is to forcefully destroy it and rebuild it. Kale thought for a moment and ordered Yutong, "Pay close attention to SHELD for the next 2 days. Focus on whether or not Project Insight has been activated." As long as the aircraft carrier hadn't taken to the skies, it didn't matter if they were given 3 days to catch their breath. However, if the aircraft carrier's Sky Insight program was activated, it would touch the bottom line that Kyle could allow. From now on, the SHELD cleansing plan would be completely linked to Project Insight. After Kale left the basement, he and Yutong took a car back to the Dihao Tower. When the car stopped in front of the building's main entrance, the sound of a loud argument came from the entrance. Kale, who had just gotten out of the car, looked over in surprise. He saw 2 tall and strong men in suits and leather shoes. They even wore sunglasses. One on the left and one on the right, each of them holding the pretty girl's arms and lifting her towards the door. The punk girl struggled violently. Her smoky and beautiful face was full of anger. She realized that she couldn't get away with the strength of her arms. She couldn't help but threaten in a cold voice, "Hurry up and let me go. Otherwise, I won't go easy on you too." "How can you go easy on us?" One of the men snorted. "Don't force me." The punk girl raised her eyebrows coldly. The men didn't notice that her palms were beginning to glow with a faint green mist. At this moment, a cold and calm voice sounded, "What are you doing?" The 2 men looked up. When they saw Kale, who had returned to the door, they jumped in fright. They quickly let go of the punk girl's arms and respectfully bowed, "Greetings, master." The punk girl glanced at Kale and silently lowered her head to adjust her sleeves. The green mist on her hands silently disappeared as if it had never appeared. The other man explained, "This girl came to the company's consultation window and insisted that she was Yutong's watcher's friend. She even publicly scolded you." Yutong stepped forward and softly said, "She is indeed my friend." "That's right." The 2 K2s were stunned. Their family's devil overseer actually had a friend? "Okay, you 2 can continue with your work." Kale looked at the punk girl and said helplessly, "As for her, let alone scolding me once, even if she scolded me 10 times, it wouldn't be a big deal. Why did this lady come to the unnatural firm of her own accord?" Chapter 273. Friend of the Sentinel, she scolded the family head and still ignored it. "Who is this girl?" The 2 trainees obeyed the order and returned to their posts. They didn't know that they had secretly escaped a calamity. It was Yutong's only close friend, the owner of the magnetic field control ability, Lorna. "What are you doing here?" Kale looked at the punk girl. Ever since he returned to Earth, he couldn't do anything to this girl in front of him. And once he had physical contact with her, there would be eye-catching auroras. "I'm here to look for Yutong." "Can't I?" Lorna rolled her eyes at him and stepped forward. She placed her right hand on Yutong's shoulder domineeringly, as if she was officially declaring her ownership. Yutong didn't reject it. She just blinked and looked at Kale. Her clear gem-like eyes revealed some helplessness. "Let's go upstairs first." Kale felt a headache. He felt like the good stuff was being taken by the other party. Heroic, direct, domineering, rebellious, impudent. These were usually used to describe boys, but they were all possessed by a girl. Moreover, the other party was a woman with perfect looks. "All right, since Yutong followed you, I'll acknowledge you," Lorna said straightforwardly as she naturally put her hand on Kale's shoulder. Kale reacted quickly. He tilted his body slightly and dodged her hand. Lorna was slightly stunned. Only then did she recall the scene of the two shaking hands last time. She couldn't help but retract her hand awkwardly. The three of them entered the private elevator and went straight to the office on the top floor. Back in the hall, Kale sat down on the sofa. Lorna didn't stand on ceremony and sat next to him on the sofa. The two of them crossed their legs at the same time. Yutong smiled. She found a pair of slippers from the shoe cabinet, picked out a precious wine from the wine cabinet, and took out 3 glasses from the cabinet. The other trainees didn't have permission to enter the office on the top floor, so there weren't even any servants here. All the complicated matters were done by Yutong alone. Looking at her methodical manner, Lorna sighed and said meaningfully, "What a good woman. It's a pity that she met a man who doesn't know how to cherish her." Kale pretended not to hear her. He opened the red wine bottle and poured himself a glass. "Pour some for me too," Lorna said domineeringly. She raised her chin and gestured at an empty glass on the table. "You have hands. If you want to pour, pour it yourself." Kale looked at her and took a sip of the sweet red wine. "I'll do it." Yutong walked out of the kitchen and placed the fruit plate on the table. She picked up the wine bottle and filled Lorna's empty glass. Kale coughed lightly. "Yutong, you can't spoil her." Lorna took a sip of wine and had just relaxed in pleasure when she heard this. She immediately looked indignant and retorted, "Who exactly has Yutong been spoiling all this time? This woman wouldn't come to snatch Yutong, right?" Kale became vigilant and asked tentatively, "Ms. Lorna, tell me, why are you here?" He didn't believe that she was here just for Yutong. This time, Kale was mentally prepared. He swallowed the wine in advance, afraid that the other party would say something terrifying again. Lorna hesitated for a moment, then said, "Actually, I'm here to apply for a job at this company." "Apply?" Kale was stunned. He thought for a moment and asked, "You want to join the unnatural firm?" Lorna nodded. This time, even Yutong was surprised. "Lorna, don't you like freedom? Why do you suddenly want to apply for a job at the company?" "I don't have money to spend. Can't I find a job? Besides, I can be with Yutong every day," Lorna said with a smile, but a hint of sadness flashed across her eyes before it disappeared. But Kyle's sharp senses still managed to catch it. So that was the case. The sadness and fragility in her heart was hidden behind a strong and cold appearance. Was this the main source of her domineering and rebellious nature? Kale suddenly understood something. He stared at Lorna and exposed her. "Are you still lying? You want to join the unnatural firm because you want to borrow resources to find the person you're looking for, right? For example, your parents or relatives." As if he had hit the nail on the head, Lorna's body trembled violently. She lowered her head and hid her face in her short dark green hair. Her shoulders trembled uncontrollably. Yutong placed her hand on her shoulder. Silver light surfaced in her eyes as she comforted her with a gentle thought. Lorna quickly recovered. She raised her head and boldly admitted, "That's right. I'm indeed looking for someone, but it's not my parents. My parents didn't exist before and after I was born." In that case, she was indeed an android from a certain research and manufacturing laboratory. Kale had expected this. "I'm looking for second brother and big sister. When I was very young, I stayed with them and was monitored and studied by a group of people." Lorna sank into some kind of painful and unforgettable memory. She said calmly and frankly, "Later, we separated. I was alone in another basement. When I grew up a little, they wanted to control me, so I used my ability to kill everyone and escape. She spoke casually, but the content was hair-raising. No one knew how cruel and terrifying that experience was. Second brother and big sister? Kale's heart skipped a beat. He seemed to have thought of something and asked, what were their names? Lorna shook her head. We didn't have names back then, only numbers. I don't know what they're called now. What about their appearance and characteristics? Kale asked. Lorna tilted her head and recalled, second brother ran very fast, much faster than us. She paused for a moment, then said fondly, as for big sister, she was as beautiful as me. After her ability awakened, her hair turned bright red. So my hair became dark green. Ran very fast. Red hair? That's right. Kyle spread out his hands and said, at the beginning, the researchers and forces that imprisoned you were the Hydra organization lurking in the world's underground. Hydra organization, Lorna muttered to herself, unable to hide the disgust in her beautiful eyes. As for your second brother and big sister, they should still be imprisoned somewhere in the world, Kale pondered. Those were the only two mutants that had appeared in the original movie, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. In terms of ability alone, their mutant abilities were definitely no less than magnetic field control. Lorna. Kale thought for a moment, then looked at her and said seriously, you can join the unnatural firm, but the company is full of Family Cal members, so do you want to consider joining Family Cal? Lorna asked in surprise, like Yutong? One level lower than Yutong, Red Stair trainee, but you can usually follow Yutong. Kale threw out an olive branch and tempted her. Our family is now preparing to deal with Hydra. If you join, you can use their power to find the whereabouts of those two people. Then I'll think about it. Lorna nodded. If word of this conversation got out, many people would probably go crazy with envy. Kale's personal invitation to become a Red Stair trainee in one step, what an honor. Chapter 274. The reason why Kale invited her directly as the head of the family was that Lorna was fully qualified with her ability. Just like Yutong back then, although she was young, her potential wasn't something other children could compare to. Moreover, he could use this opportunity to establish an emotional connection in advance. Not only the current Lorna, but he also wanted to rope in the future Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Family Cal currently had many low to mid-level combatants, but they still lacked high-end combatants who could hold their own. If the three Lorna siblings, who were mutants, joined, it would truly be like adding wings to a tiger. At that time, not only would they be the strongest family on Earth, but they would also be the strongest faction on Earth. It's far from enough. I have to prepare more countermeasures. Kale sighed inwardly. He raised his head slightly and drank the wine in his glass in one gulp. His thoughts weren't all on the evil Hydra at the moment. Instead, he was still looking far into the future at the Titan King sitting high on the throne of the universe. No matter how strong he was, he could only be the god of Earth. The future enemy was the true overlord of the universe. Kale could feel the pressure of time, and the crisis of the end of the world was approaching day by day. The more one stood at the peak of power, the more they could sense the troubles from beyond the heavens. This might be why someone as strong as the Ancient One was still scheming all day long. Lorna looked at the silent Kale, and an inexplicable emotion welled up in her heart. She suddenly had the urge to approach him. However, when she saw Yutong sitting next to him, all her emotions and thoughts disappeared, and all her movements stopped. Lorna bit her lip and made a decision. She pretended to be relaxed and said, well, I've decided. I've thought about it. I'll give it a try. Are you sure? Kale looked at her suspiciously, deeply surprised. This so-called consideration didn't even take 10 seconds, right? However, he was still happy that she agreed. There were still many family benefits that could be temporarily waived. What, are you going back on your word? Lorna rolled her eyes and asked with her arms crossed. How can I take back what I've said? Cale smiled and said in a deep voice, family members will often use code names to replace their names when they move outside. You can use one now. After that, Yutong will log your personal information into the family's butler, the Lord God's database, and send out a notification to all K2 about the new member. Family code name? Lorna thought for a moment, and her cheeks flushed slightly. She waved her hand nonchalantly and said, then let's call it North Star. The name didn't sound like much at first, but only by studying it deeply could one understand the deep meaning behind it. The North Star, the starry sky of the North Pole, didn't it represent the aurora? A hint of worry flashed through Yutong's beautiful eyes as she looked at the aloof Lorna. North Star, not a bad name. Cale didn't think too much about it. He also asked the vice to open up Lorna's family authority as a Red Stair Cardi. Lorna looked at Yutong, her gaze lingering on the long black dress. She blinked and said, then, do I have to wear the same clothes as Yutong in the future? You? Cale frowned slightly and sized Lorna up from head to toe. Lorna wasn't used to it, and she lowered her head and rubbed her fingers bashfully. Then, Cale shook his head and said softly, forget it. That style doesn't suit you. You can wear leather clothes like Natasha's and be a pure lackey. Lorna's expression froze. She raised her delicate eyebrows, and her cold and handsome face darkened. Cale stood up from his seat and looked down at her seriously. Remember, from now on, you're a member of Family Cal. Whether you live or die, you'll never be able to shake off this identity and title. Lorna's heart trembled, and she nodded subconsciously. She stood up and bent down slightly. She stretched out her right hand and said stiffly, a little unaccustomed to it, got it, Bo. Boss. Care smiled. This time, he didn't hesitate. He tapped her fair palm lightly with his finger. In just an instant, the brilliant aurora shone, then dimmed and extinguished. After Cale returned to his room to rest, only Yutong and Lorna were left in the hall on the top floor. Lorna was still in a daze. She tasted the red wine and secretly looked at her palm from time to time. No one knew what she was thinking. Watching all of this from the side, Yutong's jewel-like eyes became even more worried. She activated her ability and said a few words to Lorna in her mind. Lorna's expression changed drastically. She put the glass back on the table in a panic and explained, Yutong, you're thinking too much. I just want to stay by your side and protect you from being harmed by him. Isn't this buy one get one free? Yutong rolled her eyes but didn't expose her. She was just worried for Lorna. Boss was perfect in everything, but he was severely lacking in certain aspects. As a human, he was cold and heartless. As long as Lorna walked into this pit, she would never be able to escape. She could only wait for an indefinite period of time. One day, you'll understand that it's not that we're not outstanding enough. It's just that we're half a century too late and missed the best period. Yutong warned Lorna in her mind one last time and didn't say anything else. What she didn't know was that this only aroused Lorna's competitiveness. In the afternoon, he slept all the way until night fell. Cale woke up feeling refreshed. Just as he left the room, Yutong received a new message about SHELD afternoon. Captain America Steve and SHELD Deputy Director Natasha entered SHELD's headquarters together. Half an hour later, SHELD's agents were mobilized on a large scale to pursue and arrest the two of them. Director SHELD also issued an official arrest warrant at SHELD. What about now? Cale asked as he washed his face. Yutong reported, the SHELD agents haven't been caught yet. Also, Our people sent a message saying that Steve and Natasha have already left New York City and are heading toward New Jersey. New Jersey? Cale found the name familiar. He immediately said, "Vice, open the map of the United States and let me see the general location of New Jersey." "Yes, master." Weiss appeared out of nowhere and jumped to the side of the washstand. Its mechanical eyes shot out a circular digital map projection. Kyle glanced at it and said thoughtfully, "So that's how it is. There's a recruit training base very close to New Jersey." "Recruit training base?" "Master, there's no military base in this area," Weiss reminded him. "Of course. After all, that's the recruit training base from 1944. Steve and I came from there. There's no mistake." Cale smiled. Now that he thought about it, that was the original starting point, the place where he was reborn. "Prepare the fighter jet." "Let's go take a look," Cale said with interest. "Yes." Yutong and Weiss answered in unison. Chapter 275. Near the border of the United States, New Jersey. It was already late at night, and the desolate wilderness was pitch black, with only a few rays of light cast down by the stars. Several abandoned ancient fortresses and military buildings stretched across the land like huge tombs, surrounded by high-voltage electric fences that had been out of power for an unknown number of years. Two shadows, one big and one small, quietly appeared, agilely climbing over the 3-meter-high electric fence and entering the old military base that was sealed off. The signal disappeared here. There should be a router and equipment to isolate the signal. Natasha said helplessly as she held up the signal detector. She turned around and saw Steve standing at the door, looking absent-minded as he stared blankly at the modern-style building in front of him. "What's wrong? Did you find anything?" Natasha asked in surprise. Steve shook his head and said with emotion, "This is where Cale and I started from when we were born in the military." "Patriarch?" Natasha was surprised. She looked at the unremarkable military base again, her beautiful eyes filled with extraordinary splendor. It was one thing to cultivate Captain America, but she didn't expect that even the symbol of peace came from here. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this base was the place where legends rose. When those two soldiers left during the war era of World War II, they were like two suns, shining through the darkness and shining brightly in the world. "Follow me. The building next to us didn't exist before I left. It should have been added later." Steve waved his hand and led Natasha to the front door of a building. He raised his Adaman shield and rammed it into the locked door with brute force. With a boom, the iron door fell inwards, raising a cloud of dust. Natasha looked at the hole and couldn't help but shake her head inwardly, muttering, as expected of someone who used to fight alongside the Patriarch. The two entered, and Steve fumbled around to turn on the main switch. Countless light bulbs flickered on and off, and then the entire building was filled with dim yellow light again. The interior was obviously an underground studio. There were many bookcases for storing files, desks and chairs, and huge photos of people hung on the walls on both sides of the hall. From left to right, it was Cale, Fry, Howard, and the current SHELD logo of an eagle, sword, and shield. These are the founding members of SHELD. Natasha thought for a moment and said with realization, "So that's how it is. This should be where SHELD was first established. When I was recommended by the Patriarch, SHELD headquarters had already been built in New York, and this site was abandoned. It's abandoned on the surface, but there are people who use it." As Steve spoke, he searched with his rich experience and quickly found an underground dark room. They continued to delve deeper to find the secrets hidden behind S.H.I.E.L.D. 5 minutes later, the two of them were in a standoff with a supercomputer in the basement. That's right, the enemy was a supercomputer. To be more precise, it was an internal artificial intelligence of S.H.E.L.D., that was pieced together by a room full of multi-unit storage machines, old-fashioned monitors, dusty cameras, and so on. However, this artificial intelligence was not a machine-derived mind. It was a former Hydra scientist who converted his brain memory and consciousness into code before he died and stored it in the supercomputer. This intelligent host had been secretly guiding Hydra for decades to infiltrate SHELD, and even Frey's highest authority was deleted. This was the most serious mistake SHELD made since its establishment. They should not have chosen to accept former Hydra scientists to complete the human-turned-machine experimental research for the sake of rapid development. Captain Steve, I still remember very clearly that you got on the train with that demon and wanted to kill us all. A digitally formed skeletal smiley face was projected on the screen, and a cold mechanical voice came from the loudspeaker. It's you. Steve frowned. He remembered that more than 60 years ago, on a high-speed train, the Hydra scientist that the commando mission was to capture. In that battle, Baki fell to the bottom of an iceberg in order to save him. If it weren't for Kale's Blue Eagle, all three of them would have died. Finally, you remember me. The skeletal man grinned and said smugly, but one of you three has been fighting for us for the past 10 years, so he has made up for his sins. Steve's body trembled as the veins on his forehead bulged. He said angrily, "Is it Baki? Where the hell is he? Tell me." "He is the one who attacked Nick Fry in the afternoon. He is still in New York, very safe. But the two of you are about to die." At this point, the skull could no longer hold back his anger and revealed his hidden killing intent and claws. Ka ka ka. The main door of the basement suddenly closed automatically, sealing off the hall where the supercomputer was stored. Captain. Natasha looked around and had a bad feeling. Years of battle experience reminded her to run away from this place. What did you do? Steve was shocked. He raised his fist and punched the screen showing the skeletal man. But then, another screen lit up, and the skeletal man laughed and said, "From the moment you came in, missiles were launched at this location. I have been stalling for time. In 5 seconds, everything here will be destroyed. There is no time to escape. Damn it." Steve's face changed drastically. He hugged and pressed Natasha under him as fast as he could and raised the Adaman shield above their heads with his other hand. The skull was still laughing maniacally, acting as the Grim Reaper's countdown. 3, 2, 1. The next moment. The expected missile bombardment didn't happen. All the sound stopped and the basement fell into a strange silence. Steve was surprised. He looked up at the screen, but the skeletal man's digital face was still in a daze. Even it didn't know what had happened. The skeletal man mumbled to himself, "Where are the missiles? How did this happen?" The missile signal suddenly disappeared. Boom! At the same time, the automatically closed underground door seemed to have been hit from the outside. A huge hammer mark appeared on the steel door. Steve put down the shield and let out a long breath. He's here. It's over. Natasha shrugged. Him? The skeletal man didn't understand. The next moment, the sound of the collision became several times louder. The entire building seemed to shake violently. The steel door, which was theoretically impenetrable, couldn't take the pressure and collapsed. At the door, Kale put away his hammer-shaped left hand and walked in calmly with a piece of metal shell in his right hand. 1 meter behind him, Yutong and Lorna followed closely into the hall, one on the left and one on the right. Chapter 276. Kale. Family Master. Steve and Natasha greeted each other with a smile. As if they had found their backbone, the solemnity on their faces had disappeared. Are you all right? Kale nodded in response and threw the shell wreckage in his right hand onto the ground. It was a close call, but what's that? Steve looked down and sized up the strangely shaped metal shell. There was still some black smoke coming out of it. Could it be? Natasha thought of a possibility, and her mouth opened in shock. Cale said calmly, "A missile. I ran into it on the way, and I smashed it down." Steve, Natasha slapped her forehead. As expected, saw a missile on the way and smashed it down? Do you think it's a paper plane, so simple? Sorry, in front of the current youth, dismantling a missile with bare hands is so simple. Beep beep, the camera on the computer monitor adjusted its direction. The Hydra scientists had no eyes now, so they could only see with the help of the camera. The camera first aimed at Yutong, and the computer program performed facial recognition. In a cold mechanical voice, it said, "Yutong Carl, born in Nissan, 1942. Originally the most perfect android in the Nissan research lab, now one of the three giants of family Cal. Warning. Target is an extremely dangerous person. Contact is prohibited." The camera continued to rotate. This time, it was aimed at Lorna, who happened to be walking forward. The mechanical voice became more human-like. Lorna Dan, born in Germany in 1993. Research Lab Superpower Experimenter. Ability to control magnetic fields and gravity. Warning. Target is an extremely dangerous person. Capture with caution. Cale was slightly stunned. He looked at Lorna and said in surprise, "You're still underage in 1994? It was only the end of 2008. A 15 or 16-year-old loli had matured so quickly and had the demeanor of a mature sister. As if her age had been exposed, Lorna gritted her teeth and glared coldly at the computer. The camera made a final adjustment, and Cale's figure was reflected in the lens. The figures that were piecing together the skull suddenly became chaotic, and a mechanical voice spoke intermittently, "Cale Adolph. Born in America. Legendary hero, symbol of peace. It's actually you. Warning. The target is the most dangerous person. Please leave the scene immediately or self-destruct." The realistic and somewhat funny warning sound, after the judgment and identification of the Hydra database, screamed crazily in the basement. The skull immediately obeyed the government's judgment, deleted the built-in data, and activated the self-destruct program. The situation had taken a sharp turn. Several screens were displaying the countdown to self-destruction. Some of the mainframes in the room had already begun to smoke. "Cale, you scared it so much that it's about to self-destruct," Steve said anxiously, feeling a little incredulous. "Vice." Cale nodded and called out softly, "I know what to do, Master." From Cale's body, a small rocket suddenly flew out and transformed into the front end of a plug like a weapon. It sank into the jack of one of the mainframes. In a short second, the black smoke no longer spread to the other mainframes, and the self-destruct program on the screen was turned off. From the loudspeaker came a cold and mechanical scream. "Who are you? Don't come over, Wah. Come on." In the meantime, there was a faint Vice chuckle. "Do you want to die? How can it be that simple? Let me teach you a lesson." Cale's mouth twitched. Vice, this dog, had been behaving more and more like an old gentleman ever since it ran to Tawny's studio. However, evil people had their own evil people to deal with. There was nothing wrong with using artificial intelligence to deal with. Cale reminded, "Don't kill it directly. Kill it after you get the Hydra database." "Yes, Master." Vice quickly replied, immersed in the pleasure of teaching the villain a lesson. Unlike Venom, which could fight side by side with Cale in a symbiotic manner, it could only act as a system support in the Iron Man mode. It was a rare opportunity to show off its skills, so how could Vice let it go? Cale looked at Steve, then at Natasha, and said, "Okay, leave this to me. You two should go now." "Go?" Steve and Natasha looked at each other and asked in surprise, "Why?" Lorna raised her beautiful face and said coldly, "Hydra's armed team is gathering outside. We'll cover them and attract their firepower. You non-combatants should evacuate the scene first." Non-combatants? Steve's handsome old face froze. This sentence was absolutely sarcastic to him. At the very least, he was still Captain America in World War II. Natasha's expression also changed slightly. Anger appeared in her eyes as she looked at Lorna coldly. She was the most outstanding agent of the Soviet Red Room, the Black Widow. How could she be a non-combatant? Okay, little girls don't know anything. Kale reached out with his left hand, rubbed the short dark green hair, and pressed Lorna's cold face behind her back. An aurora emerged from the point of contact. Lorna, who had always been rebellious, buried her face in her hair and remained silent. Kale reminded Steve, "What I meant was, the two of you should have something to do right now, right?" Steve was stunned for a moment before he quickly remembered that New York City was in danger. Winter Soldier, Project Insight, and the Hydra spies in SHELD. Got it. Natasha, let's go. At the thought of Baki, Steve couldn't stay any longer. He grabbed Natasha and left the basement. "Kale, I'll have to trouble you here." After Steve said that, the sound of his footsteps faded away and could no longer be heard. Kale shrugged and said in a low voice, "What trouble?" "It's just a battle." Behind him, Yutong smiled in agreement. Indeed, it was just a battle. What trouble could there be? In terms of combat, the family Cal was truly an ancestor on Earth. Especially now, with the combat power they had here, anyone who came would suffer. It's been a long time since we fought Hydra. I hope they'll remember this time. Let's go. We'll fight them on the ground. Kale put down his hand and strode upstairs. Lorna smoothed her messy hair, and the blush on her face faded as she followed Yutong. A while later, Kale and the other two arrived at the rooftop of the third floor of the building. Looking around, they saw fighter jets and armored vehicles not far away. They formed an encirclement by flying and on land. They were also conducting a carpet search with their headlights on. They slowly surrounded the old base they were in. Steve and Natasha had left earlier and were now nowhere to be seen. With their skills, they should be able to break through the encirclement of Hydra soon. Kale thought for a moment, then took out a few items from his card space and placed them on the rooftop. He snapped his fingers, and a wisp of flame jumped out of his fingertip and accurately shot at the items on the ground. The next moment, the fuses of the items were ignited, and several miniature rockets shot into the sky. Boom! A few brilliant fireworks bloomed in the sky, and the night sky instantly became as bright as day, temporarily illuminating the old base below. This was what it meant to attract firepower and hatred. Under the fireworks, Kale stood in the night wind and looked down, waiting for the arrival of the enemy. Chapter 277. Dazzling fireworks bloomed in the sky above the base. The flames and light were eye-catching, attracting the attention of everyone within a few miles. They should still be in the base. Let's go. We can't let them escape. Fighter jets hovering at low altitudes and armored vehicles conducting a carpet search were like sharks that smelled blood. They suddenly sped up and swarmed toward the old base. Two people hiding in the shadows of the night stood up in the bushes not far away from the base after they left quickly. It was a bit dangerous, but that was. Natasha looked in the direction of the base in surprise. No need to think about it. It must be Kale's doing. Steve smiled bitterly. In the face of such a dangerous situation, Kyle was probably the only one who would mischievously light up fireworks. Without thinking too much, Steve and Natasha took advantage of this rare opportunity to break out of the base. Let's go back to New York City first, but people from SHELD are still looking for us. We need to find a reliable helper. Steve ran while his eyes fell on Natasha. Don't look at me. The people I know are all from SHELD. Natasha waved her hand and said hesitantly, also, although people from Family Cal count, from the leader's attitude just now, he doesn't seem to be in a hurry about New York City. Before I know what he's thinking, I won't ask for help from the family. Steve asked curiously, the Family Cal founded by Kale. What kind of family power is this? Project Insight could threaten the safety of the world. Was this not enough for them to fight? You'll find out in the future. Family Cal members only listen to the leader. They don't issue any orders from the leader. They are all kings of their own forces or underground organizations. Natasha argued and didn't want to say more. The goal of the members of the Carl family was evolution and longevity, which were difficult for ordinary people to understand. Other than facing the family head, Kyle, everyone had their own pride and temperament. Natasha wasn't interested in the other members of her family except for a few people in her family. Steve nodded helplessly. Then there's no other way. You can only rely on me. But I just woke up from the ice not long ago, and I don't know anyone. Halfway through his words, he suddenly thought of something and his eyes lit up. Right. Steve remembered that in the military rehabilitation center, there was a black man who had retired from the military. He seemed to have been a U.S. military pilot. I know someone who should be reliable. Follow me to find him. Oh. Natasha nodded and asked casually, wait, how many days have you known him? 7 days. After the non-combatants left the base, a night battle began in the old base. No, it should be said that it was a massacre. Buzz, the enemy's small fighter jet, was the first to arrive. Its engine made a humming noise as it passed through the base's electric fence. It rushed toward the top of the building like a goshawk. Yutong was about to fight when Kale nudged Lorna and said, "There's no need to worry. Use your ability to your heart's content. Let me see your true strength." Lorna was pushed to the front, caught off guard. Looking at the small fighter jet coming toward her, she pouted and raised her hands coldly. Who's afraid of who? In fact, she hadn't fully used her ability since a few years ago when she escaped from the Hydra lab and her ability went berserk. Until now. At this moment. Lorna took a deep breath. Her gem-like eyes were solemn. Her hair fluttered without any wind, and her palm glowed with a green mist effect under the activation of her ability. Gravitational traction. In a short moment. The small fighter jet flying less than 30 meters high suddenly tilted a little as if it had been affected by an abnormal gravitational force. It was about to crash into the roof of the building. Kale looked up. The small fighter jet kept enlarging in his pupils. He couldn't help but quicken his tone and say, "Don't stop. Try harder." Lorna's face was slightly pale. She turned her palm, and a green mist surged in the air. Magnetic field control. It was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. It was also like the pressure of 1,000 kilograms had increased by dozens of times. Time and space seemed to have frozen at this moment. The enemy fighter jet stopped 10 meters in front of the building. It was like a delay of half a second in a cartoon, and then it fell heavily, almost in free fall. The fighter jet crashed on the grass in front of the building and turned into a scorching fireball. The explosion surged more than 10 meters, blowing Lorna's dark green hair into a mess. Her beautiful and cold face was handsome and domineering under the light of the fire. Even women would be swayed by it. But in less than a second, Lorna couldn't maintain her aloof expression anymore. Her pale face was flushed red. She clenched her fists excitedly and looked at Kale with anticipation and pride. "How is it? Not bad, right?" Pulling down a fighter jet with his ability alone, even if it was flying at a low altitude, was enough to shock ordinary people to the extreme. "Not bad." Kale chuckled. Lorna, who was full of adrenaline, felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her. She snorted in dissatisfaction. Kale shook his head inwardly. Not bad was an objective evaluation that was just right in terms of ability. The combination of gravitational traction and magnetic control was practically a semi-invincible domain when unleashed to the extreme. Tearing down a small fighter jet in flight was just the use of the ability that had just left the basics. Kale's ears twitched. His extraordinary senses sensed danger approaching. He pondered and said, "You don't believe me? I'll show you what a true application of abilities is." As soon as he finished speaking, Kyle and the other two broke free from gravity and floated up. They left the rooftop and flew into the sky. The next moment, the building below was hit by a fierce bombardment. In the destructive explosion, the building collapsed into ruins with a rumble. 20 meters in the air, the three of them seemed to be in space capsules as they flew under the guidance of various forces. "Why am I flying? How did you do it?" Lorna exclaimed and looked at Kale with sparkling eyes. Unexpectedly, Yutong covered her mouth and chuckled. "Look closer. Isn't this your ability?" Kale couldn't help but laugh. With his reminder, Lorna finally noticed that there was a familiar green mist around Kale's fingers. There were traction forces from above, below, left, and right, causing them to leave the ground and remain suspended in the air, thereby achieving the effect of flight. This is gravitational guidance. It can actually be used like this? Lorna was shocked. She even forgot why Kale had her ability. The enemy troops that had arrived at the base fired their rocket launchers into the air again. The shells dragged their tails and flames as they rushed toward the three of them. Not only can it be used like this, but it can also be used like this, Kale said as he formed a sword with his index and middle fingers and tapped the air at the menacing shells. Gravity distorted and the air froze like a swamp. The rocket launchers kept slowing down until they stopped half a meter away from his fingertips. This half meter was an insurmountable chasm. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.